Good evening and welcome to episode 2 of Raising the Visibility. My name is Carl Evans, CEO and founder of the Hope for Us Network. And it's my honor for you to join us tonight in another discussion on talking about bias in our institution. We're happy to have a series of experts and panel guests here who are going to be diving into the spectrum of bias in our institutions related to age. And we're going to be starting off here with just a little bit of an outline talking about where this comes from. But before we get started, I want to thank everyone for joining us on the Hope for Us Network channel on Twitch. This week, we're in the midst of our Stream for Hope Cup event, which throughout the whole week, wonderful number of volunteers have joined us to raise the visibility of resources and mental health on their Twitch platforms by not only raising funds, but talking about the discussion around proactive prevention strategies with their communities. If you look on our website at hopeforusnetwork.org, look through our Twitch channel, you will see all the participants in this year's Hope Cup 2022. And we strongly encourage you to check out their channels when they're streaming, enjoy their content as they're creating it. We support them in all their work, and we're happy for them to join the network at large. And so the more you support them, the more you're supporting the proactive prevention strategy getting out into our essential communities. Also, I want to point out that this Sunday on our Twitch network, we're going to be having the Tomorrow Show closing out Stream for Hope Cup edition of the Tomorrow Show on Sunday from 1 p.m. to 3 p.m. That'll be with Aaron Dunbar, Mike Vinopal, and Aaron Coleman for our normal special edition of the Tomorrow Show. Really encourage you to check that out as well. Without further ado, let's get into things. For you who might be new to what we're doing here at the Hope for Us Network, and this might be your first episode of Raising the Visibility that you've engaged, we want to sort of walk through what this is all about. The Hope for Us Network is an organization dedicated to something we call the proactive prevention strategies. And this is really based on the basic reality that when we talk about mental health, rates of harm, suicide completion, they're escalating and outpacing a number of existing resources that we possess. And what that means is we know this isn't just arbitrary. According to the American Foundation for Suicide Prevention, nearly 130 people die by suicide each day as of the year 2020. And we know that that number is up from the rates of suicide completion back in 2016, where you can math it out that it was about 121 persons who died by suicide each day. When we talk about rates are escalating, we know that according to Mental Health America's annual national survey, rates of illness, depression, self-harm, ideation of suicide, and attempts have increased year over year since 2017, which is an outlying statistic over the past 30 and 40 years of mental health and suicide research. According to the World Health Organization, they project that by 2032, mental illnesses like depression will be the leading cause of disability on the planet. So when we talk about proactive prevention, we're talking about a need, an essential need to get ahead of this curve and try to disrupt rates of harm. And proactive prevention strategy is about creating a central and uniform understanding of mental health, because we don't normalize mental health conversations in our community. It's about creating effective social emotional communication. When you talk about mental health, it's important for us to understand that communicating signs and symptoms, and the way you might think of a fever, a cough, a runny nose, you scrape your knee and it bleeds, those are all signs and symptoms of physiological unwellness and illness. But when it comes to our mental health, our thoughts, feelings, and emotions, how we communicate, crying is communication, but also talking. So creating effective social and emotional communication is a key strategy point of being proactive in our mental health. And naturally, that also means if we're educating, we can help develop early recognition of early signs and symptoms of mental health challenges. And that's, I think, pretty obvious why that's critical. And most importantly, when we talk about being proactive and supportive of mental health, we can't expect it to just be one commercial or one billboard or sort of everyone is automatically going to have all the answers at once. each one of us can be supportive to one another in terms of being a bridge to resources for mental health, because this is a very personalized conversation we're having. Each person deals with their mental health challenges and experiences in different ways, and we can't expect everyone to feel comfortable going to the first random person they meet. But when it's our friends and peers who can be supportive, there's a higher likeliness that we're going to reach out and communicate. So with that said, raising the visibility as a TV experience is recognizing the biggest obstacle to care and support. Before you're even talking about reaching out for lifelines or going to hospitals or seeing clinicians for treatment, the biggest obstacle is actually silence. And it's a silence driven by stigma. And this is really important for you to understand, because what content that we do on the Hope for Us network is really focused on is trying to drive towards breaking up the biggest obstacles for care and support. And when we talk about stigma, we don't just mean a buzzword. It's important you understand that stigma means the social and cultural factors that try to shape how we address and respond to mental health as individuals and communities, and how we express ourselves. And that social and cultural factors that try to control, remember when I said that mental health is communicated, our thoughts, feelings, and emotions are communicated through talking and forms of self-expression. Well, it's stigma and these social and cultural factors that actually dictate how we're going to express ourselves. And it's the reason we stay silent, is because the stigmas that make us feel weak or embarrassed or ashamed, or it's our fault, or something that we should manage on our own. And of course, those are all false, but just for understanding, that's what stigma does. And ultimately, when someone's going through something, the reason they're going to stay silent is more likely because of some sort of stigmatized attitude inside themselves or something they see out in the community. And that silence at the Hope for Us network is something we call the concealment gap. And if you think about it, it's the core issue in harm and crisis for mental health, is that people enter the onset of a mental health challenge, whether it's from genetics and biological, or it's based on trauma, something that happened to you or you experienced. There's the onset of the issue, and then individuals stay silent and keep it concealed and try to self-manage it all the way until they can't hide it anymore. And so when we talk about crisis, we're not just saying that when someone becomes at the immediate risk of taking their own life. When we talk about crisis, crisis is the moment that someone can't even conceal their mental health challenges from friends or coworkers or peers, loved ones, brother, sister, mother, father, daughter, son, etc. That's when we talk about crisis as a whole spectrum in which your life becomes so disrupted that you can't function anymore. So it's important to understand that this silence, this gap, can go on for days, weeks, months, years, decades even. And if we want to turn around rates of harm on mental health, if we want to turn around rates of crisis and people being at risk or unfortunately going to completion of suicide, we need to disrupt this escalation that is hiding in silence. And the concealment gap, as I just mentioned before, leaves us in a place where we're only able to engage people when they hit a stage of crisis. Proactive prevention is about turning that game around. And so one of our goals is to try and educate as many people as possible on early signs and symptoms and how to communicate those things and break down silence and stigmas. That's what being proactive is all about. And we have this theory that to do that, we need to make sure people understand stigma, what it looks like in communities, is that it tells us that mental health challenges look like a certain thing. And if you don't look like a certain thing, then you must not have a mental health challenge. That's what it can do to the communities around us. So it doesn't have to just be a sort of toxic behavior, like you make fun of people, and you use words, you're dismissive and negative about mental health. You don't even have to be having those attitudes to perpetuate stigmatizing beliefs. So one of the things stigma does is it makes us have false preconceived notions about what does mental health challenges look like. It can make us believe that there's only a certain type of person who can have a mental health challenge. And if you don't fit into that type of category of a certain age, ethnicity, economic status, then you must not have a mental health challenge. You believe that there's a hierarchy to mental health challenges. That's a third thing that these stigmatized attitudes in our communities can make, is that you believe that there's some things that are more important than others, and more importantly, you're of the false belief that some people who are going through a mental challenge don't require care, treatment, supports because it hasn't risen to, or the issue isn't important enough that it can make them at risk of harming themselves. That's all totally false. Why someone enters a stage of crisis, why someone could get to a point where they're at risk of harming themselves is not linked to a diagnosis or the origin of the trauma. It's the intensity in which they feel these things and experience what's going on. That's relative to an individual and can't be dictated by people fitting into some sort of universal mode. We have this series, Raising the Visibility, because we want to explore not just why individuals stay silent. We want to explore how these biases and these stigmas can impact the people who could be supportive. Because while it's just as important to talk about empowering individuals to speak out, we also need to tackle the vision of our communities and institutions, the people who can be supportive. We need to make sure they're on the same page with us. This is part of our overall theory for changing mental health and the conversation on mental health. At the network, we call it the transformation triangle. We cannot just have a discussion where it's just one group or the other. For instance, being able to change the conversation on mental health. If we go to a school, for instance, just doing an assembly for the students can be useful and impactful. Okay, you might be able to encourage and inspire someone to speak out on mental challenges or realize they're going through something that they don't even feel ashamed about. But what happens if the faculty, the teachers, aren't prepared to support that conversation? They don't know where they're supposed to turn when their student comes to them. What happens when parents or households aren't able to be supportive because maybe your parents, the grandparents, the aunts, the uncles, the cousins, they were all led to believe that mental health challenges are something that shouldn't be talked about publicly, or they're not real, or the things that you can just imagine away or pray away. Well, if you look at the triangle, empowering individuals to combat stigmas and reach out for support and recognize how they could be experiencing something, that's only one part of the big plan. We also have to find ways to empower our communities to be supportive environments, places where they're not reinforcing silencing types of attitudes. And then naturally, we also need to get institutions involved. And when we talk about institutions, I don't just mean hospitals. Of course, there's reforms and things that can happen inside of a hospital. And there's always growth and enhancements that licensed clinicians can be doing. But institutions mean schools, places of worship, our governments can all be a part of pushing out stigmas, resisting stigmas, and creating supportive environments that encourage people to recognize the earliest possible signs and symptoms of a mental health challenge. And more importantly, even if you get them to recognize it, we've got environments where people feel comfortable to reach out for that help. Because even just recognizing something's wrong isn't going to get somebody to reach out for help. If we can create an environment where people can recognize the earliest times that something's not right and they feel safe to reach out, then the challenge, the struggle even of trying to reform institutions, making sure there's enough hospital beds, making sure that we have a good, healthy approach to medications, making sure that there are licensed clinicians who are representative of our diverse culture, and people aren't just ending up on endless waiting lists because everyone's overbooked. Those reforms are 1,000% more manageable and able to be tackled, but it's hard to do anything when the biggest struggle is getting somebody to reach out before they enter a point of crisis. So in Raising the Visibility, we want to focus on the community and institution side in this season. And last week, if you had the pleasure of joining us, we talked about body image. And this week, we're talking about age. Following up next week on the 26th, closing out our May Mental Health Awareness Month, we're going to be talking about bias in our institutions, towards sexual orientation. We'll be on a small little 1 week break, and then on June 9th, we're going to be talking about gender identity and bias. And then on June 16th, we're going to be talking about the intersection of ethnicity and our institutions. And finally, in the last episode of season 1 of Raising the Visibility, we're going to be talking about a show titled Dollars and Cents. We're going to be talking about the economics of mental health. Who can afford to be ill? So today's episode is talking about age. And let's just set the preference here before we get into our expert guest tonight. Pulling stats I'm citing from our wonderful friends at the American Foundation for Suicide Prevention, AFSP. And if you go to afsp.org, they have an incredible resource and education suite where clicking on the tabs can give you information across a whole spectrum of mental health issues and concerns, from age to gender to how do you get treatment and concern. And we consider ourselves partners in prevention with them. They're allies in the cause of proactive prevention. And we got much love for AFSP, particularly the Hope for Us Network enjoys a working relationship with the American Foundation for Suicide Prevention Illinois chapter, because the network is based out of Chicago. And so these stats give us a little entry point before we bring on our first expert guest today. 1 in 5 adults in the U.S. will experience a mental illness each year. We know that nearly 1 in 20 adults in the U.S. are going to experience serious mental illnesses each year. This is based on reported surveys on people going in for treatment themselves. We also know that nearly 1 in 6 youth in America will experience a mental health disorder each year, whether it's a diagnosis or they'll report it to an institutional function. And 50% of all lifetime mental illnesses can begin at the age of 14, 75% by the age of 24. And I bring up that last stat here because when we talk about the idea of proactive prevention, we can be having conversations and be on the lookout for genetic-based mental health challenges. As early as 8 and 9 years old, you can start screening. You wouldn't get a responsible diagnosis until maybe in your early 20s because your brain is still cooking, and there's a lot of different intersecting factors for being able to confirm certain types of mental illness. You might get a diagnosis for some things in your adolescence and teen years, but there's other things that professionals might want to wait on. And I only mention that to say that starting the discussion and being aware of any potential diagnosable illnesses can dramatically alter your quality of personal and social life. It absolutely will dramatically alter your academic experience if you're being considered or mindful of these things. And then when it comes to the ideas of trauma, what we call psychological injuries, things that you experience or happen externally to someone, if we have discussions on mental health as early as possible, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 years old, we don't need to use terms like trauma and clinical depression to make people aware that it's okay to talk about your thoughts, feelings, and emotions and not bottle them up. And if we can do that and we can start this conversation early and reinforce that this conversation on mental health can be had whether you're 5 years old, 10 years old, 30 years old, 70 years old, we can create the environment that disrupts the concealment gap. It disrupts the risk of escalation. So that's where we're focused on today when we're talking about age, is that stigma makes us think that there can be too early a time for someone to experience a mental challenge. And some people get to an age where they shouldn't have mental challenges, that they should just be able to deal with it. So that's going to give me the transition to bring on our first expert guest segment today. And we're going to be talking with the wonderful Dr. Patel. And we're going to go through the bio and background as soon as we can have this wonderful human being on camera with us. Hello, what's up, Doc? I'm sorry, I couldn't help myself.
I was like, as you were talking about it, I was like pulling up all the links of the different resources and stuff and what I have. Sorry, those are my dogs again. But just pulling those all together. and just even more resources that are out there, especially like in Illinois, and resources for the BIPOC community, as well as like how parents can talk to kids and what language we should be using. So I was doing that on the side while you were talking about everything that you got covered.
And thank you so much. And I want to point out for our viewers right now, or if you're watching this at a later time, that we'll make sure the resources provided by Dr. Patel are visible within the underneath info box. And as I had mentioned earlier before, these are resources that are cultivated from afsp.org, our allies in the fight. So we'll make sure that you can find those links as well. Dr. Patel, thank you so much for joining us. And I think it's important. Let's get a little bio action going. Tell us a little bit about yourself.
I'm like, where do I start? Today's been a day full of a lot of things. But yeah, I think I made some notes while you were talking about some of the intro topics too. But when I'm think about like being first generation, I actually, like through grad school, I realized I'm not considered first generation. My brother actually is. So I was born in India and I moved here when I was 1. But I am first generation to go to school. My dad only went up to 8th grade, and my mom's degree really doesn't count, but there's a lot of pressure of just growing up within the Indian culture, South Asian community. A lot of like, when you hear those stereotypical of like becoming a doctor, engineer, lawyer, all these different things. And that's where a lot of my life was. Like it everything I was supposed to be doing, studied, focused on school, and even like being told with my parents, you're fine, like things are fine, just keep going, focus on school. There was just like not that space to talk about mental health, but I also didn't even know how to have those conversations because it was never really talked about. And so I had a really bad car accident when I was 21 years old. I was a junior at DePaul University during our fall quarter, and I fractured my pelvis, and I had to leave in the middle of midterms and recover from all of that. And then went back my winter quarter, and I started to have panic-like symptoms. But even though I grew up here, I knew like, yeah, I feel anxious, or I'll like, I feel sad or depressed. We say those words, but I truly did not know what that felt like, and experiencing it, not knowing and having the language surrounding it. And so at the age of 21, I actually went to therapy in secret at our counseling department at DePaul. And I still felt very ashamed, and the stigma that's just associated with mental health in the South Asian culture and community, that I didn't even know how to talk about it. And I remember the one question that my therapist asked me, and she said, tell me about yourself. And I said all these different things, and she's like, no, don't tell me the superficial stuff. Don't tell me the surface level things. Really tell me about yourself. And I just told her, I'm like, I don't know. And I'm 21 years old. I have no idea. And that's like one of my favorite questions now to ask any of my new patients I work with, like, tell me about yourself. And it meant such a big thing because up until then, I did everything I was supposed to do. Yeah, little white lies here and there and all these little small things. But I didn't go against my parents. I didn't go against the cultural norms. And if you think about it too, a little bit of an identity crisis, I grew up in a very traditional Indian household while also trying to navigate the American culture and trying to mix both. And it was very hard. But I'm also very blessed and thankful to be able to learn about my culture and grow up with it, know the language. But there's also this whole other side that when I did share with my mom, something's wrong. Like I'm not sleeping, I'm not eating. I was feeling very nauseous. I couldn't keep my food in. I couldn't be alone. I never had any suicidal ideations or anything, but I struggled with just the anxiety, and it was so much. And so I did a lot of those 15-minute drop-in sessions, and I finally did an intake, and they asked me if I wanted a South Asian therapist, and I said, nope, not at all. And that goes right back to the way that I grew up, of keeping things in the family, not really talking about mental health. Like you said, like you talked about going to churches and talking to your priest or your pastor. But in my family, just in the South Asian culture, it's like you don't want other people knowing your business. You don't want people gossiping. You keep things in. And I felt very alone. I didn't even want to tell my friends because nobody knew I was going through this or experiencing what I did. And so I did agree to see a South Asian therapist, and it ended up being such a blessing in disguise. From the worst situation in my life, ended up leading me to therapy, and I fell in love with it. That the next quarter, I ended up changing my major to psychology, and for the first time, I actually got great grades. I did really well academically, and a lot of the pressures that were placed culturally of doing well, it reversed, and I started putting the pressure on myself that I had to be good. I had to be like, I needed to be smart enough, good enough. I needed to get straight A's, or I needed to all do all these things that were kind of engraved when I was growing up. But it switched, and I started doing it to myself. And that was something of that perfectionism. And it really did take a little bit of a toll on me because I struggled with that flexibility and change after my car accident. And when my plan fell apart. I was pre-med. I was a bio major. I was going to be still be Dr. Patel, but maybe hopefully medical route. A little bit of a rebel going into psychology. I joke about that, but I truly say that having that car accident, as hard and traumatic as it was for me, it led me to therapy, which led me to really falling in love with the process, learning about myself, really focusing on me. And from that, the year after, like in 2011, I actually lost my mom to suicide, and I lost my grandmother a month later. And so there's a lot of loss within just like after 21. So a lot of my 20s were just kind of like surviving and really just making it through in grad school. But my involvement with AFSP started in 2014 as a volunteer. And 3 years ago, I had the honor of being nominated for a board position, and I accepted. And it was great being one of like the first South Asian females on the board. I thought it was huge for me in representing those that look like me, those that understand those cultural dynamics. And there's a lot of similarities across various different cultures on the stigma and the shame, keeping it within the family, but also bringing a younger voice to the narrative. Because if you look at my social media, you see all these pictures, all these things, like they're great, like I look happy, and that's what a lot of social media can do. But then I create a mental health one to really talk about the other side of things, that people see me as this bubbly, outgoing person, and yet there's this whole other side. When I finally started speaking up about my own anxiety and struggles with depression, and then talking about my mom's story, that mental health does run in my family, and I still face challenges of talking about mental health. Um, I don't know if there's some people in the community, or there's just some people that don't agree with what I do, or just like that old school mentality of like, you don't really want to talk about it, don't say anything negative about the culture or things like that. And that's very hard because change is only going to happen when we talk about this and really start advocating and bringing voices to these stories and normalizing mental health, but also providing education.
Man, thank you so much. That's a lot of things in there that I just want to thank you for being able to feel comfortable to share with us. And it's a powerful narrative of bringing you into this big quest to change and reduce rates of harm, and really get into this fight for empowering people to take control of their own mental health and take it away from things that keep us silent, to take the agency back. And I think your background and your journey here is a precise example of the mountains that we've got to face. The title of the show is Age, and the fact is that you can't have mental health discussions. You cannot have responsible mental health discussions without recognizing and appreciating that there is no one experience that's linear. It's Everything is intersectional. So I'm glad that you were able to elaborate in talking about your cultural and social intersections here in terms of the fact that at whatever age the conversation starts for someone, and we're going to stay focused with you, in your experience where the conversation starts, it's not just your 15, 16, 23 that could hinder you having an effective conversation. It's that we have to consider your background and that your parents and family members and the culture as a whole microcosm doesn't have to be sitting there making fun of people and being like toxic and abrasive and hostile. The belief of keeping things inside the household and believing we don't talk about X, Y, Z can just be its own form of silence. And I kind of, if you feel comfortable, want to re-prosecute. We'll talk about your professional side now in a second.
Yeah, and I
But
can go into a little bit what you talked about too, of that, of a lot of just like, and this is my perspective, so I can't speak for everybody else, but my experience and my perception of it too, of what are other people gonna say? What's the community gonna say? Is it gonna look bad upon our family, or is it gonna make us look like we're bad people, or anything like that? And the difference, and I don't know if it would have made a difference if I had actually, because at DePaul at that time, the sessions were $5 for like at least 20 sessions, and then at least that's what they provided at that time back in when I went there from 2006 to 2010. I was like, wow, it feels so long ago now. But that allowed me to still go to therapy in secret and be able to get those services. But in a lot of colleges offer like services either by a sliding scale or even for free or in limited amount, and I was so thankful to be able to utilize that, because I don't know what I would have, where I would have gotten support, because I don't know, maybe my parents would have been more open about it. I don't know how the conversation would have gone, because I didn't end up having that. I just went and like got services that way. And so I think that's very important to see like what kind of services or even free services are out there if you might have problems with family, or even like with age. I see like teenagers or some that want to come to therapy, but their parents don't really believe in it.
and that's so essential, and I think that's a good place to sort of dive in a little further. Is one part of a challenge here when we talk about proactive is getting people to recognize signs and symptoms. But you know, I don't think I don't. You don't need a textbook definition, and um, you don't need a large vocabulary to wake up and realize something doesn't feel right. The way you described your own experiences, and so let's just talk a little bit more about this point of like, all right, I don't feel right, but I look out into my world, and what are the things people could be doing or not doing that make me feel I can't talk to them? So there's a cultural intersection, and you spoke specifically to your end, but from your professional background, what's the thing that sort of seems as things that can make someone get into the head? I'm not going to talk about this. I don't want to talk about this.
It's different. I feel like the kids and teenagers and parents and young adults I see now, they're much, and I'm in private practice, so it depends like the area that you're in, especially. And there's some teenagers that really, no, I don't want to be here. And I really try to take a different approach to the style that I'm working with them, very more so of a non-threatening way. I use like my first name Dimple as like an icebreaker, or just like kind of connecting with them different than the way of not also feeling judged. I think the biggest thing that there is that fear of judgment from your therapist, and even for kids, especially like another authority figure or another teacher. And it's so different along those lines that it's a hard thing to kind of balance. And I wanted to go back to one of like your end part of your question. Could you repeat that for me again?
Well, just what are things that you've found or you've heard from your perspective that when we'll talk about younger person right now,
Mm-hmm.
that they look out at people who could be supportive, whether it's a parent, teacher, people who could be these bridges, and they get
Mm-hmm.
into their head. not going to talk to them.
Oh, the most common one I hear from my teenagers is, my parents just don't get me. They don't understand. They just tell me to focus on like the things that I got to get done and I'll be fine, or I'm behind. So if I get my work done, then I'll be able to focus. And there's some there are some individuals that do struggle with mental health issues, and it really does become a challenge in terms of having the motivation to get up and do work, or even when you're feeling lethargic and tired and exhausted. That impacts your motivation, impacts your appetite, impacts your social interactions, or even wanting to do anything. And I think there's a lot, just from what I've seen in the clinical work that I've had, a big impact with COVID, and a lot of an increase in anxiety and depression in teenagers, younger kids, a lot of worries, and then readjusting back into the mainstream school system while being at home for a while, and that structure. But the other part too, what I hear is, even at school, and I know schools are very busy, they got a lot on their plates, with a lot of different students struggling too. But from the kids that I hear too, of like, well, I feel dismissed. I don't feel heard. I don't feel like I'm going to be noticed for what I'm really going through. But the other part too is, well, how are we communicating this? I don't think it's really going to work. So why bother? They don't really get it. So I'm not going to really go in and discuss this further. And so I like to bring in family sessions to really work on opening up that line of communication versus just saying, well, have you talked to your parents and have you tried this, and this? That does not work. Because if I had a therapist tell me to my Indian parents, like, have you tried talking to your parents? I'd be like, have you met Indian parents? That is not going to work. So it's like really working with them, but also using a language that's familiar to them, but also giving them that voice and that power to feel heard. And what do they need? But I also tell them to, like, yes, I can help you do all these things, but you also have to follow through, and you have to work on convincing them too. And then not convincing them, but like open communication. But the other part too, some parents have to follow through with the work too. So it could go both sides. The kids may try, but then is it being receptive and followed up at home?
And that's a really powerful thing. Bridge isn't a one way road. We talk about being bridges to be supportive, but I gotta, I think I would like to. I'm gonna put you a little bit on a hot seat spot here, and from your professional point of view,
Okay,
opinion,
I'm gonna try my best.
Do you think it's okay to tell a teen, your parents may not get it? Like, your parents could be wrong about their view on mental health. I'm not saying they got to revolt and burn it all down, but I mean, from your professional opinion, would you say that when somebody is 10, 12, 11, 12, 13, 14, 19, 25, and they communicate and report how they've heard or even directly gotten responses from their guardian, whatever constitutes the guardian or the parent, is there such a thing as a parent being totally wrong about mental health in terms of not validating it?
100%,
Okay.
100%, 100%. And I think I used to be so nervous about, like, when early on. And what I love about therapy too is that, especially I'm in private practice too, and I have that professional opinion, but I also provide it in a way to parents and the kids too. And I've brought in like my family examples too. I'm like, listen, my dad did not get it and doesn't really understand it. And so what I do is I really work towards helping him educate and learn. But also sometimes parents might not get it and they may not understand. But I also try to frame it in a pattern of generational patterns, that, let's say my dad is in his 60s right now, and what he knows about mental health probably got passed down from his parents and their parents and their parents. And so it's like my job to help my family relearn and open up that line of communication, but also teach them these things. And so I really try to incorporate family involvement in our sessions, but I always try to be a neutral party and not just taking parents' side or not just taking the kids' side too, but really coming together and telling parents too, like, you also might have to set some boundaries, but then telling the teenagers too, where, listen, your parents are asking for these things, but also compromising. If we're not doing anything, how is anything working? And if we're not communicating, one person's feeling another way, the other person's feeling another way too, then nothing's going to get done. But I've also been very honest too of like, well, what can we do if your parents disagree and they don't understand, they're not providing those supports, but and you're still coming, that's okay. But like, can we do to help you maintain those skills and strategies to be able to continue working on this on your own, regardless if you have that support with from parents or not. But then let's look at other protective factors. Are there friends? Are there like school supports that you can have, or other activities that you can still get that validation, that support that you need if parents might totally be dismissive or not understand?
Thank you. And that's completely valuable information to share, because from my background and being anywhere of an advocate for support where I didn't have the burden and certain disciplines that, well, I'm not a clinician, okay? So being out out on the streets sort of sense of things, there is a tendency to be like, well, the parents, and we'll use parents right now because we're going to talk about other supportive folks, and we're talking youth centric at the moment. But for the lexicon of your guardians, parents, whoever that is, in any context, biological or otherwise, if they're not getting it and don't understand, that doesn't mean it has to be a confrontational, hostile thing. It doesn't mean they've got to go burn it on the ground. I love what you said here, because there's varying degrees on the spectrum of somebody's intensity with their mental health, okay? Some could be very close to something that puts them at risk of harm. Others could be going through things that the sense of intensity is more, it's a building, nettling pressure, but it's not necessarily they're in imminent risk of harm. But in any case, in any one of that part of the spectrum, if the parent isn't supportive or for anything under the umbrella of they don't believe it, they invalidate it, and there's another one I'm going to talk about in a second, the short-term answer can be, okay, we need to reroute finding an avenue for you, individual, but we don't have to just throw away this person, especially if you hedge on the bet that this guardian may actually care and love you, even if you feel it's not demonstrated. Then there is a value and there is an opportunity that education could enlighten and get them into the support thing, into being supportive to well-being. And I'm so glad you brought that up, that it doesn't just have to be like, oh, screw you parents, you're out of the picture, we're going to go this way. Now, here's the thing I wonder about, because in one context, talking about mental challenges, we're talking right on the nose, it's could be diagnosable, it could be trauma experience that they're going through. What about someone in the youth spectrum here who they feel something's not right, we're back there, something's not right, they go to their guardian, their parent, and they explain themselves some way. I feel this, or something's wrong. And the response from the guardian isn't no, or we don't talk about it, or pray it away. It's, well, you're just tired. You're a teen. It's school. You're supposed to be that way. The world is always tough for you, but when you get older, you'll learn this is the easiest time of your life, blah, 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 blah. Okay, and so the youth is being dismissed out of hand, but it's not mental health isn't a real thing. It's, look, you're going through puberty and grades. That's what it is. How does the youth push to advocate for themselves and not just gaslight themselves and silence themselves and say, maybe they're right. Maybe it's just test stress and it's no big deal. Let's first, number one, talk about how does the youth self-communicate about that? They think something's wrong, but they also tell, well, maybe it's just tests and it's no big deal. Does that matter? Should they still press to find someone to talk to? What do you think about that?
And it's such a great question that you brought up, and like something really stuck out to me too. While I was in grad school in my early 20s, my dad's like, "What do you know about stress?" And I felt like, I felt dismissed. I didn't feel heard. I felt like, okay, well, I guess, like, working in a doctorate program is just not stressful because it's considered school. And in that sense, like, I was frustrated with that. And I didn't at that time. I think at that time it was much more easier to talk about mental health. But back when I was in high school, it still felt like it's like 2002 to 2006. Gotta remember these dates. But I felt like it wasn't talked about as much because none of my friends ever talked about it as much. And it just was like, okay. So I guess like it wasn't like in my awareness. But what I see is there's been such a significant shift in the youth today. So when we talk about that validation, that community, that support, a lot of kids are getting support online. So there's pros and cons to social media support, but then it's also connecting with other individuals that are out there too. But you also have to be mindful and careful of like who you're interacting with, because there are a lot of like dangerous things online. But also the tip, my also advice is to like reaching out to like the school social worker or the counselor, or even like checking in with like student support specialists that are trained in this area, even if it's just like I need a few minutes to talk about it. And that's why they're there at school. But there's always that fear of, if I go and say something, that okay, what if I get hospitalized, or is there going to be any fear? And it's different, right? That part of having active versus passive ideations. I'm not in a school system right now, but I did my internship and a fellowship at a therapeutic day school, and so that a social emotional behavioral school. And I was always with the kids like all day long, so there's such a difference because they had access to me there. But for in the gen ed setting, there are specific people that are there, but there's that feeling, or sometimes from the kids that I've worked with, well, I don't think they're really helpful, or there's tell me things are just going to be fine, or I don't feel heard. And so there are various other supports that are out there. And I know NAMI has some really great supports, the crisis text line, the National Suicide Hotline as well. Those are also great ones to like reach out to, and even just like have some support groups that are there. But I would even encourage sometimes talking to friends is good and bad, because I am coming across this issue a lot too, because I have teenagers I work with. I feel responsible, or like I have to help my friend. I know they're struggling with it because I've struggled with it, and I also share with these kids too. I'm like, you also got to take care of yourself. That does not make you selfish just because you are setting boundaries there. You're not trained and equipped to handle a lot of these things. And then that could also trigger an individual's own ideations or stressors that they've been feeling. And that creates a whole other cycle that we're going back into and providing ways to support. And the biggest thing I'm coming across a lot right now is I want to like support my friend, but I'm so afraid that they're going to be mad at me, so I don't want to do anything about it. You have to tell a trusted adult, because then it takes that pressure off of you, and we can come in and take care of the situation.
And that's really really good essential information to have, because one of the things that with the network that we take pride in doing is when we do education, we consider it kind of a training mechanism, because being a peer-to-peer supporter has a tremendous potential benefit, but it does
Mm-hmm.
require taking on certain things to be aware of for responsible, because it's perfect. You touched on it right on that. It's perfectly organic that when you're being supportive of your friends, you can suddenly find yourself, especially when you're younger and you're new to the whole thing, you can find yourself suddenly signed up to be the clinician for somebody, because
Right.
when you're younger, feeling isolated can happen in any environment, in any economic background, cultural background. So it's,
Mm-hmm.
and the secret covenant keeping is innate to being younger, right? So um, I think that's an important thing to say, because just say, well, tell an adult. Well, okay, if you're in a mindset, and it might be cliche to say you don't trust any adults, but that needs to even be educated. And I'm glad that you were able to nuance it, that there are telling an adult isn't because suddenly you get over 18 and you've got the magic wand. It's if somebody is going through a mental health challenge that ultimately fits, is at risk of harming someone, damaging their quality of life, that is a medical situation. Mental health is a medical situation. And it's about getting the body safe in so that you have time for the mind. So even if we're not talking necessarily that if you do have to respond to someone who's in crisis, someone who may be at risk of harming their own life, you've got to get the body safe so that you have time to work on the mind. And that's the thing that can't just be talked down to. You may have to call emergency services. But your friend talks to you and you're communicating and you're going through things. They could still have a medical situation, even if they're not talking about they want to end their life. Think of it as a sprained ankle, broken leg. Putting ice on something is good, but you need to get them to a professional to support. So that's the way. If you're listening right now and you find yourself being a peer, being supportive is not about fixing someone's problems or being the vault. You have to understand that out of respect to someone's mental health, it's a medical situation. So if they're averse to telling their parents because of different social and cultural things, fine. But you need to look at the situation, even if it doesn't feel like an emergency. You need to understand that people who happen to be adults can help find appropriate resources for care. Okay. And that's the way you look at being supportive. Your limit is to be the shoulder that they limp on, to be the person you go and get them an ice pack, but they're only holding onto your shoulder and you're only holding them to that ice pack until you can get them to a professional who can assess for further things. Now, I wanted to jump in there further because always using teachable moments. You said something that I'd like to further clarify. Because if you're younger and you're watching right now, it can help to just know. So you said something about active thoughts and passive thoughts. What are active thoughts and passive thoughts? What does it mean?
And okay, so typically when I'm assessing for risk and everything, and it depends too. So like when I'm assessing for suicidal ideation, I always start off with, even in my intake, that just because you have ideations, I'm going to do a thorough risk assessment, but that doesn't mean that every time you might have a thought that you're getting hospitalized right away. I think that's a big fear that happens often. And so I not like, and I always say, I'm like, if I feel like you're unsafe, then I am going to hospitalize you, because at the end of the day, your safety is very important to me. And and I understand you're going to be upset with me and mad at me, and I'm okay with that. And I tell those teens, the kids too, that like are going through that situation with friends, I'm like, I'd rather have somebody be upset and mad at me and ask for forgiveness later. But in terms of like passive ideations, this is how I viewed it, and how I've seen it worked in it. And I consider a lot of those passive, like, I wish I wasn't, like, if I didn't wake up from bed, like when I go to sleep, I don't wake up, I'd be fine with that. Or if something happened, I'd be okay with that. Or I'm just like, kind of wish that every day, like I'm so exhausted from getting up every day, if I didn't wake up from my sleep, or it'd be better if I wasn't here. Things like that, along those signs of like, everything's so hard. Sometimes it would be easier if I just wasn't here, or I feel overwhelmed, nothing's ever getting better. So along those lines is how I kind of view it. But then active, I always look into that of, I want to end my life, or depending on the wording that they're going to use, of I want to kill myself. But I also look for, is there an intent and plan? And if they do have a plan, all right, what kind of safety measures can we put into place? But also making sure that the parents or any other guardian or somebody is there to help kind of support that plan, especially with kids and teenagers. But then also of like, I don't sign safety contracts or or any of those, because you can sign them, but then the moment you leave out the door, how effective is that? It doesn't they could go back on that too, and it's not as effective. But I also try to look for what are their protective factors. If they've had any ideations in the past, well, what stopped you? Let's focus on that. You've gone through this before. So what made you not act on those thoughts? Not why didn't you do it? I use the word what versus why. I feel like why sounds so negative. Like you hear like, why did you do that? It's like growing up, parents, everybody, but I go into what, because it helps us explore beyond the surface level. Like, well, what were some of the barriers or anything else that was going on? And then for plan, okay, if there is a plan, what are you going to use? And I try to get that information in. Intent, how likely are you going to act on this? And if they can't give me an answer, or they do, I had somebody I did have to hospitalize earlier this year. And I just did it. I could tell that there's just something that I'm like, are you saying yes, that you're okay and you're safe and you're agreeing to all these things so you can go home or you can do these things? And are you denying or minimizing the ideations? And I really had to do a thorough assessment on that. And at the end of it, I did have to call an ambulance and have this student hospitalized because I could not ensure safety at home. And her mom was there too, very great support within that. But it was just like a matter of like, yeah, I just don't think you're safe to go home. And I do think that, like, if you're left alone, something might happen. And right now, your absolute risk is really important to me. But also, it's really important with the contagion effect or copycat measures, especially when there's a lot of stuff in the media, really paying attention to it. Also, like TV shows and how some like certain shows could either glorify or glamorize suicide, and just really having those conversations with it. And even if you know somebody, your peer, or student, or colleague, or somebody that's died by suicide, it still impacts us in one way or another. And it's okay to still grieve that and talk about how it's impacting you. And some of those conversations I have with my teenagers. And I also have to check in with them too if there is like like a school of like, how are you doing? Is this bringing up anything for you? And as going back to your active versus passive conversation too, really thinking about that intent to complete suicide and what kind of measures do they have and what kind of access do they have, especially are there weapons at home, are there sharp objects or anything else that we can remove or get parents to put away. But I did have one very smart teenager when I was doing my one of my training sites telling me that I'm a very creative person and I can find a way to like use something to harm myself. So I always give parents that little PSA of just, be mindful that if somebody is really going to want to, they'll find a way. And so let's talk about prevention, communication. Let's get them talking about it, utilizing the strategies. But the biggest part is continuing to maintain that consistency. And yes, the basic therapeutic ones, deep breathing or like taking a walk or all the typical ones that you kind of hear about. But I also work with the teenagers that I have, like, well, what works for you and what doesn't work for you? And give it a chance of like, okay, one time it doesn't work, don't give up on that. And sometimes I joke with like just mindfulness skills or other strategies, like a little forced relaxation in session. I just call it like jokingly with them to kind of buy in session of like, we're going to do some forced relaxation because what's the likelihood of you utilizing these skills outside of session? So let's practice them here. Let's go through them together. And if you have any questions, then I'll work with you on that.
That's excellent. And it's important, it's important to highlight that, why I brought up the whole idea around, not one of the ways we destigmatize things and keep these things going is by demystifying. So, talking about the fact that, like, here's what a hospitalization process can look like. Here's the process if you talk to someone about it. It's important to understand because, again, going to a hospital isn't about curing and solving all the mysteries. It's stabilization. We say this a lot. It's about keeping the body safe. But there's another thing that I want people to take away from what you said, Dr. Patel, which is when it thinking about the act of suicide, thinking about harming yourself, thinking negative thoughts is not criminal, sinful, shameful, or wrong. And this is not being dismissive. It happens. People do think about these things. Sometimes in a state of pain, they think about them. Sometimes they're just walking around in life and the thoughts cross their mind.
Exactly. And based on also what you said too, I also try to normalize that fact that, listen, just because you've worked through all these stressors or other issues that you've gone through, it's kind of like a roller coaster, right? You're going to have good days, you're going to have bad days. And this is why we work on those strategies to really implement those in. But I like to have them practice them when they're regulated, because let's say if you're having a panic attack and I'm telling you to use deep breathing, it's not going to be as effective, because in that heightened state, yeah, you can calm it down, but you want to practice it when you're regulated, so then it can become an automatic reaction for you that you can implement easily in. And those are also different things to kind of point in there.
Excellent, exactly. And getting into excuse me, and getting specifically into strategies, self-care strategies is something that is the value of education. It's groups like AFSP provide education, the network. You see us doing live streams, and that's the visible part. The iceberg part of our organization is doing direct education. We encourage you to hit us up, because educating on proactive prevention isn't just knowing it's okay to talk about something. It's understanding how mental health works. You think of your brain like a bottle of soda. That's something that we use. Take all the academic vernacular out of there, but we say, think of your brain like a bottle of soda. Let's see if I get enough in here. And you shake up a bottle enough. Let's see if this works, right?
Yeah.
And you got all this pressure, right? And
yeah. You can explode.
It can explode unless you do this. Let's see if we get the magic. Look.
Oh, please.
That's my sound effect in there. But so fine, bottle fills up with pressure, and you want to valve it out so it doesn't explode. But an important thing to understand is that the pressure is caused from two things. It's either caused from internal things, genetics, chemical imbalances, biological things, traumatic brain injuries. One place that builds up pressure in you is from things that are happening inside your body. Okay. The other place that pressure can build up, and it will build up for everybody at some point, is externally, that the things that are happening in life. And some of those pressures that come from life create a pressure that it's a matter of you got to go scream into a pillow or go for a run or watch a funny movie or cry your eyes out. And then other times there are pressures that come that, create such an intensive load that no matter how many meals you eat, how much you cry, you try to drink it away or use substances, it won't go away. And there is no personal value you have, and you need to go get other supports, because when we talk about that pressure and exploding, what we mean is not that you spontaneously combust, but rather it becomes impossible to focus on your basic tasks, going to school,
Your
going to
overall
work.
functioning, it could trickle in onto everything, like
Loss of
even
sleep.
projecting on, let's say you're mad at your boss or work or coworker or something, but then you come home and you take it out on your spouse or your kids or anything. And there's so much within it that it's very important too. And especially with anxiety, when we talk about it, you'll hear this a lot of, you have to sit with it. Because the hardest part is sitting with that feeling, but who wants to? We don't want, like, that triggering event. We don't want to sit with it. So then we develop these avoidance behaviors, and then those lead to short-term relief patterns of avoidance. I'm going to go on my phone, or I'm going to watch TV, or I'm going to nap, or I'm not going to do my homework. And then those become into long-term patterns, and the cycle continues and continues, and we're stuck in there. And those are patterns that we want to break within that cycle, and it takes time, but also too of it's our natural reaction of not wanting to sit with that distress, because who wants to feel that way? I don't even. And I've written an article for a piece of, I'm a therapist and I struggle with generalized anxiety disorder. And I also have talked about being in the side of being a patient, but also as a therapist to help normalize it. And not like some therapists might not even disclose that, but my style is different. And I think that big other part that you mentioned, and I didn't, you mentioned this in the beginning or somewhere along the lines, but the disparities in accessing services in different communities. So I work out in St. Charles, Illinois, and Geneva, and so uh, Auburn, and so I see a very different population out there, and I'm in private practice. But there's a whole I've been in various different settings where I've been in inpatient hospital settings. I've been in community mental health. I've worked with individuals that are on Medicaid, right now, private insurance. And the private practice I work for doesn't take Medicaid. And it's very different finding services that are out there, but also finding therapists that are culturally competent. Just because I'm Asian and I identify as, and like, I say I'm South Asian, but that doesn't mean that my experience is going to be the same as another South Asian individual. I have to ask those questions. I have to be able to be willing to learn about these things. And I even say straight up to patients that I might not get everything right, but I'm going to look to you for feedback. And please feel free to correct me or jump in and tell me, hey, I don't agree with this, or this is not how I see it, but this is more so what it is. And I'm like, it helps me to know, because I like that feedback. It helps me grow as a clinician, because I can't assume. Early on in my career, when I first started doing therapy, I did make that assumption just because I'm like, oh, we're Asian. No, I got the feedback back of, and I was such a newbie. So no, we don't have the same experiences. And I made that error, but it was a learning opportunity of like, I was like, oh yeah, that is right. I don't have the same experiences, even though under race, like we're both Asian, we don't have the same experiences, and that's a really big part. But also, what you talked about too of trusted adult. Some individuals within, like in certain communities, don't trust adults or don't trust um authority figures, or even calling, like, let's say if there's a mental health crisis going on, and some individuals might not call the cops for support, or even going out and talking and receiving the services of, no, because what if something else happens? What if there isn't enough support to go out there? And there are barriers, even like transportation, financial, social economic status. There's so many barriers that actually can prevent individuals from seeking support, even from elderly to younger kids.
Well, that's exactly the point about the intersectionality and the intersecting. They're not one or the other. They're interconnected, and I think that's a good way to sort of wind down this part of the episode. Is core one is getting individuals to feel comfortable, safe to talk and recognize, hey, there's something wrong. Then the next mountain is talk. Who do I talk to? And we're focused here on making sure that we can empower and support um, people who could be the bridges, and we want them to be aware of that. That you know, in the youth centric part of this discussion, it doesn't matter how you perceive 10-year-old, 14-year-old, 15-year-old, 21-year-old, 35-year-old still living at home, whatever you want to call youths, and really anyone with mental health, but in the youth centric language, it doesn't matter how you perceive them. When someone starts to communicate a sense of feeling unwell, you've got to, and this is talking to anyone who has somebody communicate mental health to them, especially parents in this case, right? You've got to shut off the knee-jerk reactions of thinking you have an answer for them, okay? And be ready to put on the support hat, which is either saying I don't know, and you don't have to say I don't know, but to say okay, I'm taking you seriously. Let's find out what might be a course of action here. And because look, even a parent can get, to use the right language, can get freaked out at the idea of their kids gonna go in to see a clinician because of all the stigmas that make people silent. Whether they think they don't want people to know that my kid's seeing a shrink, or they think all of a sudden their kid says something about feeling a type of way. It also, out of love, a parent could suddenly be like, I got to go into 24-hour death watch, to be perfectly graphic, because they're thinking it has to be hyper crisis stage. So one thing I would sort of leave in this part here, based if you've been able to listen to Dr. Patel's excellent insights, is that the single most essential thing you can do, and we're talking really parents here, we spent the most amount of time, is understand that it's not about having an answer or having the perfect terminology. It's about being willing to keep a conversation going. And again, you don't need to know any terms. If your kid, your charge said something to you, they don't feel right, the most powerful thing you can do right there is just take them seriously at that point. And even if in the back of your head you're freaking out and don't know what to do, finding resources and professionals is an easier hill, and it's a hill to climb, even if it's a financial situation or what have you, or geographic situation. That's an easier hill to climb than having someone you love be silent and not say anything. The victory is the conversation starter, right? So with that, Dr. Patel, I can't thank you for sharing so much of your insights. I kind of want to read a little, say a few things that, could you please, before we sort of transition over, number one, will you stay with us for the panel, or do you got to go?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
I was planning on to.
All right, rock and roll. And we've got something between the panel and this, but you put some insights in our sort of like in our covert chat. Would you feel comfortable sort of sharing those insights just with us real quick before we transition over?
Yeah. Like the I was just looking through our AFSP slides, just about how we can, the biggest takeaways to have, and even if you don't know, it's okay not to know. There's times where I don't know certain things too, and I'm like, you know what, I will look it up to you and I will get back to you. If anything, like I will make sure that we get you the help. But especially your parents, friends, caregivers, or anybody, you want to avoid minimizing an individual's feelings. You want to avoid trying to convince them that life is worth living, and also avoid trying to fix things, because in that moment they're in crisis and nothing is going to be sticking in their brain, through their mind. They're in that fight or flight mode, and especially within that, and if they are in crisis, what they need, like exactly what Carl said, to be heard, and then leading them to support and help. Don't leave them alone, but listen to their story, offer them help with finding a professional. I've offered friends to go to their first appointment with them and take active steps like removing any sharp objects, removing any knives, anything they can get their hands, or even razors, of like what they can do to harm themselves. But in that meantime, if you know that, especially at our clinic, and especially parents too, just making sure that, yes, ambulances can be pricey and everything, but at the end of the day, it's worth safety overall, because we avoid at our clinic. We do not like having parents drive kids to the hospital, because that's a safety. What if they jump out of the car? What if something happens in that, right? We want to ensure safety and directly going in there. And so if you feel like there might be some risk, call the ambulance, call 911, and have them transport them there.
Thank you. And that's also a thing you're going to hear us talk a lot about, is even when you bring, emergency services into it, it's a conversation that can't be had without talking about things like what happens if law enforcement shows up. But that's also why Raising the Visibility has multiple episodes, because we don't want to rob ourselves of the opportunity to spend time on that. So you'll need to tune in with us in other episodes where we'll be talking about things like the intersectional realities of support services aren't for everybody. I mean, on the face of it, it says they are, but there's bias and prejudices and things about that. So With that said, we're going to stay zeroed in on sort of the age intersection here. Dr. Patel, thank you so much for this focus conversation.
I feel like I could talk about this forever.
And we're gonna be diving in a little bit further with a wonderful panel of advocates and lived experience voices. But we've got a little short messaging for you before we go over to the panel. So stay with us as we keep the good times going.
Hey, Jester, what does stigmas mean?
You've never heard of stigmas?
Nope.
You ever feel like you can't talk about how you're feeling?
Yeah, sometimes I don't feel good, but I don't want to say something because I feel silly.
You're not alone, Blooper. Many people feel like they're supposed to hide their feelings. Some can feel silly, even ashamed. It's like their own fault for feeling bad.
When I feel down, I don't want to talk because everyone around me seems fine. I don't want to bring them down.
Things that make us feel bad to talk about our mental health are stigmas.
Oh, I get it. But who made stigmas, Jester? Like, where do they come from?
Stigmas try to control how we express ourselves. And when it comes to mental health, stigmas are false beliefs about how mental health works.
But Jester, who makes stigmas? When did I catch them?
Stigmas don't come from one person or place. We all have inherited stigmas through social and cultural factors.
Social and cultural factors?
We all get stigmas by false beliefs about mental health being repeated by friends, family, and in pop culture like TV.
How do I stop from catching stigmas, Jester?
It's not someone's fault for being influenced by stigmas, but we resist stigmas by understanding that our mental health is a natural part of life. And having a mental health challenge is just the same way in any other part of our body is unwell.
You mean like if I catch a cold or get hurt falling off my bike?
Exactly. There are many things we can do to take care of ourselves. And there are professionals who can help us with mental health challenges. In fact, the Hope For Us Network's mission is to help folks like you and I learn the early signs of mental health challenges, and so we can do something about it before it leads to harm or complications in our lives.
Early signs?
Remember, Blooper, how stigmas make us silent?
Yep.
It's common for people to hide their mental health challenges until it feels like it's too much and they reach a point of crisis.
Well, if so many of us are impacted by stigmas, that makes us hide our mental health. It's almost like there is a culture of concealment.
Yes, Blooper. You could say when it comes to mental health, we all live in concealment culture.
So, the network wants to help people address their mental health before they get to the crisis?
Exactly, Blooper. Proactive prevention is all about disrupting mental health challenges from escalating.
Oh, awesome! How can I join?
You can become proactive by connecting with the Hope For Us Network.
I really want to make a difference.
Together we can. Come on, I'll help you.
Whoa, network buddies. All right. All right. Love me some network buddies. Thanks, Paul. Hey, Puppetries and the network buddies will be continuing to join us for more segments on the network. If you saw them last week, that was their debut. And expect to hear more from our good friends over the course of these coming weeks and summer. We're now going to be moving into a panel discussion to expand on talking about bias in institutions by age with a number of great voices and guests. But before we continue, I just wanted to really quickly highlight again some programming that is coming up. Number one, right now this week is the Hope Stream for Hope Cup 2022. It's an event supporting bringing mental health resources and visibility into the stream universe. It's hosted on Twitch, in which several participants have stood up to volunteer to promote proactive prevention strategy in their Twitch communities while raising funds for the Hope for Us Network mission. Each one of the guests each one of the participants who is streaming throughout the week is also not only just talking about mental health, but inviting you to join the communities as well as supporting Hope for Us Network. And so we wanted to make sure we give a shout out and love to those wonderful folks out there. If you check on our Twitch channel and on our website, you can see the individuals who've stepped up to kick butt with us. One of the things that we're most proud about with the Stream for Hope Cup is that it's not like a competition where there's a first, second, and last, even though there's an overall fundraising sort of champion, if you will. We're proud because this is really about empowering individuals to use their own voice, and you don't have to be an expert on mental health. If you're someone who wants to make an impact, one of the most powerful things you can do is raise the visibility of resources and information. So again, if you go to the Hope for Us Network website or go through our Twitch, and this is me screen sharing the website direct, you can look at all the information about the Stream for Hope Cup 2022. You can see our phenomenal participants this year and also get to learn their streaming schedules. You still have time as it runs through till Sunday. And another thing we wanted to draw your attention to is that on this coming Sunday, on May 22nd, we'll be closing out the Stream for Hope Cup week with another special episode of the Tomorrow Show, where we'll be having guests from the Stream for Hope Cup, among other things happening. And so we just have a real action-packed week for all of you. So with that said, I want to get into the next part of our segment. We're going to be having a super awesome panel. We have guests who come from advocate side, lived experience side, and they're going to tell you a little bit about themselves. But first, we're going to bring them all on camera. So first, of course, let's bring back our guest expert, Dr. Patel, Dimple Patel. Dimple, can we see you? Can we hear you?
Can you hear me?
Ooh, there you are.
Okay.
Fantastic. Next, we're going to be bringing on Marlo. Marlo, can we hear you? Can we see you?
I am muted. Now you can. Hi.
Ooh, there it is. What up, Marlo?
Hi. How are you all doing?
Fantastic. And I wanted to do it this way. I'm going to be changing formats from time to time. But Marlo, let's do a little 411 while the camera is focused on you.
Yes.
Tell us a little bit about yourself and what brings you to the conversation panel today.
So I'm Marlo, as you already said, and my brain's just noodles, so I already said this a little bit earlier. But so I have a podcast that is called Caguamas y Dramas, where we talk about breaking stigma in the Spanish-speaking community. And it's been a really awesome project to work on. Honestly, we're kind of in a bit of a pause because of some changes in the team. But that's kind of what I do. I am neurodivergent and have, a couple mixes of the mental illnesses and stuff. So that's kind of like my experience. And I never know what to say. I have a cat. And I really like wearing shirts that have weird, images on. Not weird, but fun images on them. So that's just me.
Got it. Loving it. Thanks for joining us. Can we get Ryan on? All right.
Oh, you're cheesing at images on shirts. That was fantastic. Hey, I'm Ryan Shannon. Man, I cover way more than I should at this point. Dr. Patel, you opened up a lot of stuff for me today. Hopefully we can talk about that. But I myself, I'm a military veteran. I'm wounded. I've been through my own demons and darkness. I've fought through those. I'm a parent of a, for lack of a better word, suicide survivor. Man, I cover too much of this world too at this point, but there's a lot of it in there. I was thinking about how best to introduce myself. I think we go through things sometimes to set us up to be able to tackle other things in the future, and that's the story. That's my story, and we can talk about that as we go. But that's the little bit of background I have.
Thank you so much. Pleasure for you to join us, Ryan. Next up, Roger. Roger.
Good evening, Carl. Yes, I am Roger. I'm here primarily because of my experience, 19 years on the National Suicide Prevention Lifeline, 4,000 hours, probably 11 or 12,000 phone calls. That plus 15 years working with a teen anti-drug, anti-alcohol program in the Fox Valley known as Operation Snowball. So I have been in and around various aspects of suicide and suicide prevention services for 20 years.
Well, it's good to have you with us, Roger. And full disclosure, if you've seen some earlier network stuff, Roger joined us in Arkansas Hope. Well, Marlo was there too, but I bring up Roger because if you are familiar with me, I've tended to intersect with Roger quite a few times. So it's always a pleasure to have you on, Roger. Any chance to have your insights?
It's an honor always to be asked. Thank you.
Leo, can we see you? Can we hear you?
Yep, here I am. Hi, Carl. Dr. Patel, I think I'm your biggest fan.
Oh, thank you.
That was wonderful. So yeah, I'm Leo. I'm a musical theater writer and composer in New York. And I kind of fit into this because the first show that I wrote centers around my experiences and my co-writer David's experiences with mental health and mental illness. We'll probably get into that in a little bit. The show is called True, T-R-U.
Thank you so much, Leo. And then I'm hoping everything's good. Jianna, are you with us?
Hi, I am here.
Okay.
I made it. Thank you. I'm Jianna. My background is in occupational therapy. I'm here because originally I needed to understand what was going on with myself and how I was feeling, and now that camaraderie and that shared passion for prevention, I guess, is why I'm still here.
Well, we really appreciate you. So thank you all for joining us. And to get things started, I kind of have a little bit of a lightning round starter because we're talking about age, and we spend a little time being youth-centric. If people feel comfortable talking from different parts of the age spectrum, there's no rules here. It's Thunderdome. But what I wanted to start with is just sort of to get ourselves comfortable. There's a term called hidden curriculum, which is part of a stigmatizing sort of mentality where there's certain things that we don't realize are sort of bias driving that we just accept. And when it comes to age, I think this is relevant. So what I mean by that is, you start Googling what hidden curriculum means. For instance, the idea of accepting that you're in a labor field where you're going to be overworked. So you either silence, minimize, or dismiss the mental health impact and toxicity of that because, it's just part of the hustle culture of things. That's a hidden curriculum, right? When it comes to age, can you think of other sort of hidden curriculums that we associate, with it? I've got a low-hanging fruit one, but I don't want to be the one to say it and rob somebody if you need like an easy answer. So it'll be in the private chat for somebody, just in case you're sort of drawing a blank. Okay. But who maybe thinks they have an answer already or could think of something? And yeah, and it'll go all over the age spectrum. It could be anything. So anyone think of sort of like a thing that's just sort of automatically reinforced that you just sort of accept?
I'll go.
Was that right?
Yeah.
Go on in.
I can hit you with two. I can hit you from my own lived experience, and then we'll talk about my son too. I joined the military at 21 or at 20. I couldn't drink yet, but they handed me a gun. And then you go off and you see all this other parts of the world, and you do stuff, but you're only 20 years old, and you're supposed to be this warrior, and they feed that to you, and all that stuff, and none of that stuff's supposed to affect you, and then you're supposed to come home. But on top of that, the wounded part of it as well is I was 28, 29 when I got shot, and I'm only 28. And when you leave the military, you leave the military. You don't. There's nothing. There's no assistance on the outside. It's now your job to figure out, and you're supposed to just pull yourself up and keep trucking along like you didn't do the things or see the things that you saw. And I think it's very confusing because you're filled with all this purpose, and you have a job, and you have a mission and a thing to do, and then it's gone. And I was older. I was 28. There's 20-year-olds. You could be 18 and have something like that occur to you. And it's very confusing. It's the loneliness you feel in that is something that I don't know how to describe it or explain it still to this day. That's that piece. And now if we move to the far left end of that, my 8-year-old created a plan and wanted to do it. And I'd worked in the mental health field for 6 or 7 years. I don't know, Carl, how long were we doing that for when this happened? And my life right now is infinitely better financially and stability wise and home life and everything else that I didn't have as a kid. So nobody teaches you how to be a parent. First off, there's no book that's going to show you how to do that. Nobody teaches you how to be a parent for a kid who wants to take their own life. It just doesn't happen. And here I thought I had set up this groundwork of just rainbows and butterflies, and I didn't. I put a lot of this blame, and I'll use that talk a lot. That's my fault, but I know it's not. So Dr. Patel, don't come at me for that. Those words I'm saying there. But
No, I get it.
He was 8 years old. He was 8 years old. It was 370 days ago he left inpatient treatment, and I still don't know how to deal with my own mental health. I got great support networks and things like that going on, but now I had to try and help an 8-year-old navigate it, and there's nobody teaches you that. There's nobody out there that's going to teach you that. And luckily, through the work that we'd already done, Carl, he knew he could ask for help. And like I said, there's a lot that Dr. Patel touched on already. And I want to say this, and I'll make it very clear. If you're a parent, your job is to understand, and you have to go. You have to. There's no excuse to not fix your own shit to figure out and help your kid. You know what I mean? But that's. I hope that answered that question. I could talk about this for hours.
Well, we got time, and that's exactly what I'm talking about. And I think a salient thing to people to take away from there is 8 years old seems way too young to have a mental health challenge, and that was a very rude awakening. So thank you for sharing all that, Ryan. I know we're going to continue to circle into these different experiences. So did anyone else sort of have a chance to think of something that came to them? Roger.
The far end of the spectrum, what most people don't realize is the very first retirement community was formed in 1954. Prior to that, there were no retirement communities. Everybody grew up in multi-generational households. We've now taken all of our elders, our wisdom keepers, if you will, and put them into beautiful retirement communities, and there's many advantages to that. But I spoke at a retirement community a couple of years ago outside of Las Vegas, and after I spoke to them about what they can do to help their grandchildren, pause, there's a tradition that says in the indigenous tribes, children learn how to live their lives from their parents. They learn wisdom from their grandparents. This one resident of this retirement community said, please don't misunderstand. I love it here. I'm well cared for, and I have friends. But now that my family knows that, they don't come see me anymore. And so I think we have at the other end of the spectrum, we have a whole group of people who are put in retirement communities, given a golf club and said, don't call us, we'll call you. And many of them, because I speak at lots of retirement communities, many of them will shake their heads at this, and they're basically just waiting to die.
That's part of, I think, of a less visible part of the conversation. And you brought up the retirement community thing, and I think from a perspective on mental health that we don't appreciate is, especially through from a statistics standpoint, one of the highest rates of, unfortunately, suicide completion are adults, predominantly males, over the age of 55, oftentimes, in raw numbers, because of it's certainly because of certain means and things, but it's an invisible conversation that you get to a certain age and maybe you're supposed to have it all figured out, kind of a thing. And I just think on the older side of the mental health spectrum, as technology medicine lets us get older and older, that lifespan and quality of care being what it is means that somebody could be having an even longer experience with mental challenges than going back a few years. As a perspective, if anyone remembers the TV show The Golden Girls, shout out to Betty White among others, but the Golden Girls, they're in a retirement home. B. Arthur's character is 55, and Betty White's character was like 57, and and they're supposed to be like the ancient ones, and that's the 1980s TV show. So anyway, I just bring that up because I think one part of this conversation that is in the mental health conversation that doesn't get enough attention is, our seniors, is people who get past the working age, traditional parenting age, etc. They do kind of just disappear. If they have the privilege to get to a retirement home, that's one thing, and then there's a whole other part that we'll talk about in episode 6 about if they don't have people who don't have financial access for their own care.
The term that I prefer rather than seniors is wisdom keepers.
Wisdom keepers
or elders.
Elders and wisdom keepers adopted and heard. Thank you so much, Roger, for that.
Oh, can I jump in and talk about wisdom keepers?
Let's do it.
I am by no means a wisdom keeper. I'm 25, so I have a little bit before I get to be a wisdom keeper. I'm working on it though, day by day. But Carl has seen my show True, the musical, and it was really important to us when we started writing the show to show kind of not just our stories, but how our stories have affected the relationships that we have in our lives. There isn't really a love story in the musical, which doesn't really happen in musicals. They're usually centered around like a love story. And so we really wanted to show, the story of a young teacher who's in his 20s and his relationship with his father, and then a young artist who again is in her 20s and her relationship with her grandmother. Hi friend. I don't know if anybody saw that. That was really cute. Anyway, one of the things that we really wanted to focus on was sort of course, writing a show that went into great detail about how we felt about our experiences, but also kind of writing a little bit of a love letter to our grandmothers, and sort of the wisdom that they instilled in us when we were going through things that they had also gone through when they were our age, but with completely different language. And that's kind of an interesting thing. That's kind of an interesting thing with, now that we're talking about age and just different generations, just the completely the complete difference in language and how you can explain not only what you're feeling, but how you can also sit across from somebody who's sharing their feelings and their experiences with you in the language that you use to respond. I know that my co-writer David and I had experiences with our family, grandparents, parents, aunts, uncles, friends that we call family as well, that were both shocking because we were surprised that other folks in our lives had felt the same way as us and had gone through similar things, that we would have never guessed because nobody ever talks about things. And also the opposite. We were shocked by some folks who we thought would be super supportive and maybe weren't. And so one of the things that we really wanted to touch on in the show is that family is not necessarily who you are related to. It can be really anybody. It's not blood. I mean, it can be, it definitely can be. But it's all about redefining family and redefining your support system. So yeah.
It's perfect.
I guess I want to piggy on that. I'll be honest, my support system's not my family and it's not my friends. It is who I've had to find along the way, and it is hard. So through my process, like, I did sign myself inpatient and I did have to go through those obstacles because I didn't know what else to do. And I also was on the border of where I was at. And so I pay for my friends and I pay for my support because that's what I need and it's worth it. And through my process, I would say I have learned it is very important to interview and find out who is going to be in your corner and who's going to be like that person for you. So ask the hard questions. Like if you're struggling with something, say like, have you worked with whichever demographic you fall in or you understand or whatever you're looking for, and say, okay, so you're telling me you're feminism, but what does that mean to you? Because it could mean something different to me than what you're posting on your website. So I like to say, like, is it just empowering women or is it minimizing others? So it just kind of depends on what you're looking for and equal values and that relationship. So I love my friends and I love my family and we have a really good relationship, but it's not meeting my mental health needs and my challenges because kind of everything that we heard earlier, from Ms. Patel, I understand and I have been there and it's important. I guess that's pretty much. Thank you for saying that.
Can I share something with you real quick?
Yes.
Because you and I'm not gonna remember names. I've been blown up twice, so you gotta excuse me. Names are just one of those things. I
know, like we need some names on here.
I've accepted that fact. I'm never gonna remember names the first time given to me. It's war. Anyway, so what I want to share with you. So I've been doing this thing. I've been fighting my demons, right, for probably about 10 years now. And you mentioned family. You both did. You all mentioned family at one point, and how family isn't necessarily blood. And I want to tell you from deep within my soul and heart that I love my family to death, but they're just not part of it. They don't know it. They don't get it. They don't assist. They aren't there. My family has never once asked me about anything that's occurred in the military, but complete strangers have. And when my son went through his stuff, that support network wasn't there either. So I'm not going to say I cut my family out or anything like that, which I think is okay to do. And people, they don't like when I say those words and they don't like when they hear that. But if you're going to become better, you have to become better. And you got to put the people around you that are going to help you be better. And if those people aren't your mom or your dad or your brothers or your sisters, then you gotta create that distance and that cushion. And for instance, my support network is in this house. It's me, my wife, my sons, my 4 dogs in the tiny zoo that I'm creating here for some reason. And we've got gerbils, we got guinea pigs, we got cats, we got chameleons. So whatever you guys want, let me know. You can come pet all the animals. But my family doesn't come around. They just don't. And do you want to guess how many times when my kids were born in Hawaii and my family lived in Illinois, how many times I caught some shit because I've never seen my grandkids, and now they're one road down the street, about an hour drive, and they just don't show up. So this is part of my healing process, and I want to share it with you, is that it's not my responsibility for my parents to have a relationship with their grandchildren. It's not my responsibility. And one day, as shitty as this sounds, my parents are going to be on their deathbeds, and their grandkids aren't going to be there because they don't know who those people are. And this is still something that Carl, I'm going to curse. I was a sailor, guys. I'm qualified to curse, so I'm going to do it. That's what I tell people at Thanksgiving when I drop F-bombs. But they have to deal with that. It's not my fault anymore. You know what I mean? And it took me forever to come to that realization that all I can do is be the best dad that I can be for those kids. And it pisses me off because they don't have the wisdom keepers. They have great grandparents, but they're getting older and they're leaving the earth, you know, and that's really shitty and it sucks. And so I kind of have to do my best. I'm only 34, so I am also not a wisdom keeper. But in a way, I feel like I have to fill that gap, you know. And yeah, you just touched on that, and I wanted, because I imagine you struggle with it. They're my parents, they're my brother and sister, they're my family members, they're blood. But that doesn't make them great people in terms of helping me and what I've gone through, you know. And the same with my wife, my partner. Her mom passed away from cancer, and she was the best one out of all of them, and she's gone. And so we had to deal with that, you know. I don't want to keep rambling, but I want to make it very clear. And when I finally realized that, hey, it's okay. I call my mom every other day. I call my dad every week. But it's okay to create that boundary and protect yourself and let that kind of fall into their hands. They're the ones that have to take on that responsibility, you know. And once I started realizing that, I started healing in a whole different process. So I just kind of wanted to share that.
Well, that's great. And I see some head nodding. I'm going to get to you because you can jump in whenever you want, anyone. But I want to sort of carry on with that, of the fact that, like, listening to you all talk, the difficulty of bringing agency for our mental health is across the age spectrum as well. I mean, it's hard as a youth, but it doesn't seem to get easier if you're 30, 55, 75. You know, being able to take agency and put yourself in the place to get what you need, you know, to keep yourself supportive, safe. And I kind of just want to keep riffing on that too, because Leo, you said something that I think, especially when we're talking about agency, you said something that really just set off a wildfire for me about communication. And, you know, the whole statement about you got to meet people where they are, not where you're assuming them to be. Let's just talk about that age-linked fact with communication. Takes different strategies, different approaches, different ways. For frankness, like sometimes it's being frankness and cussing up a storm. And y'all can cuss. I mean, we're a young network, so we ain't got sponsors to. Well, I mean, Joyce Foundation, what up? But that's a whole. We haven't talked about that yet. But anyway, you know, no one's watching us yet. So, but yeah, but go riffing off of Leo. You talking about communication, like personal story aside. One of the ways I actually connected with my own mental health was a double hitter in high school. You know, I didn't even talk about my suicide attempts as a kid until in high school we read the book Ordinary People, which I grew up literally in the exact towns that the book is based on. So so Conrad is going up and down streets that I would go up and down every day. But I didn't go and see a clinician until I had a mental health discussion that started after seeing Spring Awakening with somebody else, with a friend of mine, and as a musical. So anyway, it just became a safe avenue. So I just want to talk about like communication in age, like your 8-year-old. What does that conversation look like? What does it look like to have a conversation with your parent or with an elder?
If I get called bruh one more time in this house, or they use the word sussy, or it's just and I'm 34 and I thought I was cool, and I'm learning very quickly that I'm becoming the old guy in this house, right? And
wait till they get to middle school and high school. You'll learn other words that I have to ask my sixth graders and stuff like, what does that mean? And I'm 34 too.
yo,
Same.
somebody
and I work
typed,
with middle school kids.
yeah, somebody typed yo in chat. Like that's one of them too. Yo, and I'm like, oh my gosh.
But I'm the mom who picks up my kids, and I'm like, "Hey, homie," and I give them the biggest hug ever. And other parents are like, "What?"
So here's what I look like. Okay. So I get the looks every now and then. I am your prototypical Navy sailor covered in tattoos and all this. So, and I wear not skinny jeans, but because I'm starting to learn that my metabolism's slowing down at 34 too. But I don't dress like this is how I dress, right? This is what I went to work in today, and so his mom's got a nose piercing and she's got tattoos and stuff like that. So we look like this alternative couple when we roll in, and our kids have different colored hair every week. It's changing. And so we just kind of like celebrate that type of stuff, but the vernacular, man, that communication is rough. And I've got a kid he's got DMDD, disruptive mood dysregulation disorder, and communication, especially feelings and things like that, is a big part of it. It's very difficult. He doesn't want to talk about it. He comes off as the broody teenager, with the hoodie on and this and that. And I've learned that I can't force him to talk to me. I can't. That's just not how it works. So over the last year of this diagnosis, I kind of had to start tailoring and relearning who I was and how I had to communicate with one kid, whereas the other kid is the complete opposite, and he's goofy and loud and outgoing and will not shut up at all, ever. For no reason will he be quiet. And my other son really doesn't want to talk. And so it's weird. It's hard to have that communication. And it's just learning. And also coming to the realization that I'm getting old and I have to deal with that, So
that was the best. Yeah, no, I appreciate that too. And it makes me think, Marlo, I've had the privilege of listening to some episodes of your podcast, and it's focused on mental health, in the Spanish-speaking spectrums. There's a lot of episodes where folks were talking, touch on something that Dr. Patel brought up in our guest panel. What up, little buddy? Which was the cultural intersection of talking about mental health. And sometimes it's an actual literal language barrier, but I just noticed in your podcast that comes up a lot is people talking about inheriting a certain level of, sometimes you have somebody from, a Mexican background, somebody from a different South American backgrounds, who they keep reiterating things that Dr. Patel talked about, where it's something in the household about mental health that made it a hard conversation to have. I don't know if that jumps out to you, but I don't want to put you on the spot, but
No, it's okay. It's okay. Honestly, today my anxiety is a little heightened, so I'm glad you pointed me out. Anyway, so honestly, I think that it's a very common experience for like minority, I'm gonna call us kids, but like to have this like carried anxiety and like fears and all these things. Like I am right now in the first like I could really call healing experience or like time in my life, and like I think about like the stuff that we were conditioned to believe at home, or like the different things or how we were conditioned also, because like it was so based in guilt and anger and all of these things. Like I was telling a friend, like it took me like living completely on my own to realize that I'm actually like a really clean person, because I had believed for like 26 years or whatever that I was this lazy F-bomb. And like it was just 26 years of truly believing this and believing that I wasn't clean and I wasn't this and I wasn't that. And then like finally being alone and coming from a place of love, of like, I'm going to keep my space clean because I love it clean, instead of like, oh, if you don't do this, you're a lazy fuck, because it changes everything. And like, I think that at least for me, it's, that's been the hardest thing trying to like heal from it. It's trying to separate myself from the ways of thinking that have just been like conditioned into my experience.
And that's a perfect illustration. That's exactly what, and I don't want people to get hung up on these terms. I'm just using it because it was just came to me. But when I talk about hitting curriculum, like that's part of it. Like you got conditioned into that sort of belief, and there's an MO behind it. And I see a lot of head nodding. So if anyone wants to sort of jump in, let me just jump in. Just go for it.
I was going to tell you she's an honorary sailor with the way she dropped that F-bomb, so I'm bringing it. My wife's watching this. So like I said, my support network's here. So my wife is watching right now, and she's feeding me some stuff that maybe I wasn't thinking of. So especially with this communication piece, is I've never hid my mental health from my children, not once. I'm a medical marijuana user. I work out. I beat the shit out of my body when I'm in a bad day. Music is always going on in this house. But my son, we talk to him like he's an adult, and I know some people aren't cool with that. All right, so I don't censor myself here or anything. But also he knows that that's not just something he can go do out in the world, you know. But he fully understands his diagnosis. He knows what it is. We talk to him about it. But they know things that my own parents don't know about my time in service, because they've asked the questions, and I'm not going to hide it, and I'm not going to lie to them. And through that process, and this is a big piece of this too, is that if we want to help our children, especially parents, if you don't want to end up in that situation where I was in, where an ambulance is at the school and I'm being called in, and they shut the school down, and all this crazy stuff was going on. And you have to be open and honest with your kid. You can't, if you're having a shitty day, tell you, I'm having a shitty day, man. Just get the heck away from me for a few minutes. All right, cool, Dad. And then they pop off, you know. But you got to do it with respect. You got to treat your kid with respect. You can't. I'm totally against this dictatorship of, yeah, I'm the parent and I got to make my voice a little loud every now and then to get your attention. But you're also 8 years old and 7 years old, and you're going to be just batshit crazy and goofing off and yelling and screaming and this and that. And if I'm yelling at you, it's because I'm not in that mood right now. I'm not having that time right now, you know? So the biggest thing I've learned in the last year with all of this is that I'll lose my shit on my kids sometimes, and I'll scream at them and I'll yell at them. And then 5 minutes later, it's the biggest guilt trip on my heart that I've ever felt. And I come in and I sit them down and I explain my feelings to them. This is why I yelled at you. You guys, I've told you 6 times to quit throwing the goddamn ball in the house. And it's like talking to a wall. Do you understand how that's frustrating? When I ask you to do something over and over and over again, and then you don't do it. So then I yell, and when I yell, it's full-blown military boot camp yell in the house, and all the neighbors can hear, you know. So it's scary. And I'm like, I don't like doing that. I hate that. I hate that I have to do that. So that communication piece is a big part, but I think it has to traverse across all generations, right? I curse in front of my elderly grandmother, you know, and she throws it back at me now, and it's cool to see, you know, the back and forth that we can go. It's having that. Don't change up who you are because of somebody's age. I don't think that helps anybody.
I wanted to jump back off of like what everybody has said. I think what I related to the most of just like how we are as adults, and especially coming from just like this Indian culture of even very similar to the Hispanic culture too, of like respecting your elders, not really saying anything, of you kind of have to make up for what your parents didn't have, like the opportunities that are provided to you. So that internal guilt and not really having that sense of identity. But like you said, finally, like in my 30s now that I'm finally done with school and everything, the moment I graduated with my doctor, like the cultural expectations, my dad was like, so when are you getting married? You can say congratulations, you know, I just like got off, like got my doctorate, like, is that enough? And even then, of like, no matter, and it's because of the way that the culture is of constantly wanting and seeking and needing that approval. And I've noticed a lot of just within a lot of minority cultures too, and underrepresented communities where of seeking that approval, people pleasing. And I've said that, like, I actually now openly out loud say it before I wouldn't even utter the words, because I just couldn't get myself to do that, or talked about the insecurities. But it all stemmed from like how I was raised, and like you said, like the open conversations with your kids. That doesn't happen in my household. I still try, and I'm doing all these things. Like, it's like, I'm still trying to prove to somebody or to my family that I've like made it this far and doing all these things. But that cultural stigma of like, don't bash the culture, don't say anything negative, but also of like whoever is like feeding these little statements to family members. And really breaks my heart, because I work so hard to like make a name for myself, but also share the story, just because it was never talked about. And I felt so alone growing up, like even in my early 20s, to go through this alone and not have anybody. But luckily I had those resources there. And yeah, just because I still have my doctorate, like, it's still very hard coming home. My job doesn't end when I come home from work. If there's risks related, I feel like I'm on call 24/7, and I have to work on boundary setting or not responding right away. But if it's a risk issue, I respond whenever I get the call or anything like that. But making that available too, and like you said, with the parents conversation and really working with them, bringing parents. And I've had sessions with just parents on how to talk to the kids or how to be able to understand where they're coming from. But then, like today, it was such a great day for me, where I worked so hard, and never in a million years would I thought that I would have, like, today's a busy day, but I got to get interviewed by ABC News, National, and CBS 2 Chicago came to my house, like big moments today. And I didn't get the best response from somebody, and it really like crushed my heart. And I was actually crying before this, and like you wouldn't see that side of me like posting on social media or not. Hence why I was a little late, because I had to refix my face before I got back on here. But you see this bubbly side, you see this other side too. But I also want to normalize the part that even as a therapist too, I struggle with these things, that I have anxiety, I have struggled with depression too. And I think a lot of people forget that about therapists too. We're not perfect. We go through our own things, and it's hard to put that hat away when I come home, because I am constantly exhausted. I have to respond or make sure people's lives or anything. And like you said, with the kids, I am seeing younger and younger kids in session. I have as young as like 6-year-olds, or parents are being very proactive of bringing them into session, of just even working on social emotional issues, or talking about emotions. And one of the things I will never forget is, like you said earlier, of like trying to figure out, finally coming to your own recently I did EMDR, because once I get licensed, I want to start practicing it. And finally, through that process, I was able to actually accept and say out loud to myself that no, I am good enough for these things. Because the way that you're raised, you're constantly put down. You're never taught those self-esteem skills and those confidence skills growing up. And that really impacts you growing up, and feeling that even though I have this degree and all this work that I do, it's not enough, or it's not good enough. And I remember with somebody, I did this project through McLean Hospital, deconstructing stigma. And if you're ever through Boston Logan Airport between Terminal B and C, I'm on there. But this was like one of my biggest like moments, if you can see this or not, or here. But what somebody told my, there we go, let me, there we go. There you go. It's on deconstructing stigma, I think, .org. But this was one of my proudest moments in life. But what somebody told my dad was, why wasn't I letting my mom's soul rest in peace? Why am I talking about this? I got so mad. And I yelled, and I said, I'm like, it's because of uneducated people like you. I felt bad saying that, but it's also the education piece. This is why I speak up, because I didn't have that support. And if I didn't go through my experiences, I wouldn't have had the opportunity or even had the guts to speak up. And I still worried, am I saying too much or not? But like you said, for your kids, I'm definitely, if and whenever I have kids, like I'm going to do it differently and let them feel comfortable sharing it. I don't know what it's going to be like to have a therapist mom. I don't know. So, they'll be in there vocabulary. Tell me how you feel. But joking wise too, of it's that part too of like, even right before this too, of like, it took me a little bit longer to join on, that I had to kind of recollect myself and remind myself that I am doing this for me. And like you said, with family, it's, I'm doing this because I want to, and I speak for my mom and I speak for myself, and not for my brother, not for my dad, but for other individuals, because I went through this and I knew how hard it was for me. And if I didn't get that opportunity, who knows what I would have gone through.
And that is so powerful and essential. Thank you. All of you have shared this far. And I want to continue to push that forward with the communication part. Thank you for bringing up that thing at Logan Airport, breaking the stigma.
Oh, thank you.
Talking about communication, sharing our stories and pushing forward is also part of our own agency, right? And I swear I'm not picking on you, but I want to go back to you, Leo, because you talked about it a little bit, but I'm going to be a little hype train for a second, and I think we're also getting rated. So, side note, Dex Howell, friend of the network, ally, squatty, yo to Dex Howell and anyone who's coming from Dex's channel. That's awesome. Leo, you talked about True the Musical, and soft touched on it. I had the privilege to see it. It was mind-blowing, powerful. You two, you guys, you got a future, you got things going. But in the show, there's stories that there's a character, Isla, right? Or Isa?
Isla.
And Truman.
There's an S in there, yeah.
That's my bad. But those two characters are very powerful stories and journeys to tell. But you had talked about how they were inspired from your personal experiences. So carrying the messages forward, like using your lived experience, I just sort of want to like marinate in this, because the way everyone shares their stories in their personal lives or professionally, as they've talked about, helps. I just kind of want to go back to, for you, when you guys decided to do this, did it ever cause you to be like, the minute we open this door, it's there forever? Like, we put this thing on. Yeah, so I just want to go with that and take it where you will.
Yeah. Oh, wow. The minute you open the door, you're right. Well, the goofy thing is that most people kind of, if they're trying to write a musical, they take a very different route than we did. And it's not that we chose to take a different route, but we started writing when I had just turned 17. So we kind of didn't have the resources to take the route that most people do. Like I wasn't even close to going to college yet to go study music or anything like that. And so I don't think that we were really worried about saying too much too early or letting people hear our thoughts, because we kind of didn't know any better. I mean, we were like basically children. I mean, I'm 17 and David was 18 then. And so I think that it starts to get a little bit difficult on the creative side of things, because when you're putting a show together that is a full-length musical, it's more than just one draft. And like I spoke about language earlier, the way that we told the story in draft number 1 was extremely problematic, not because we had ill intentions, but because we just had no idea what we were doing, what we were trying to say. We just knew that we were going through stuff and wanted to get it out there. And so, like you said, Carl, opening the doors and saying, hey, this is what I'm going through. I don't even think it was clear that we were writing our stories until like 8 drafts in, that our parents were finally like, oh, like this is like, okay. I'm sensing that this is kind of like, I think I said earlier to all of you all when we were backstage, that art imitates life. And so, yeah, we, like Carl said, we have these characters, Truman and Isla, who initially were just us, that we could hide behind those names basically. And Truman is a teacher and I'm a teacher, and Isla is an artist and we are artists. And it's like when you see the show now, it's all very clear that like this was us. But then it was sort of just the way for us to say, you know, hey, mom and dad, listen to these tunes, and maybe something will hit you that, you know, these are actually our words and not just songs that we looked up on YouTube. So now it's all kind of everyone in our families and everyone who's seen the shows kind of get that that's what we were going through. And, but like I said, I mean, now we're on draft 15 and we continue to rewrite and hope to put it up again. And then we'll probably rewrite it again. And as we continue to rewrite, it's nice because we mature as the show matures and we learn from the characters that we wrote at this point. And anytime that we're feeling down, we end up taking advice from these characters who don't exist outside of our heads until we cast them. It's such a strange, like Stranger Than Fiction, Will Ferrell. I don't know if you've seen that, but where like you're writing something and then all of a sudden it happens and then you're like, oh my gosh, this is the strangest thing ever. But yeah, you know, you open the doors. You're right. I love that you said that, Carl. You open the doors and you never know what people are going to say. The responses have been pretty good so far. Nobody's ever been mean in their responses, but it is difficult because sometimes people just don't get it. And it's tough to, we're not famous, we're not recognizable. So sometimes we're in the audience at a show and we see people leave at intermission. And I always tell David, and then I'll stop talking, I promise. I always tell David, my co-writer, that I'm just so nervous when people leave halfway through the show because we've got them on this arc. And I almost feel like it's dangerous for them to leave halfway through and not see that the story ends and the plane lands and our characters all leave the story, or we leave the story. We leave the show seeing that all the characters at least have a sense of hope. You know, we don't know what happens in Act 3 or Act 4 because it ends after that. But there are people who don't get it, and it's tough to write a show that only some people will get on purpose. You know, I don't know. I'll leave it there. I'll let somebody else.
Can I ask you a question? Because
Yeah,
this is very interesting to me. So I've never seen the show. Super interested now, though.
Neither have I.
You've never seen it either.
No, I've gotten to see half of it, and then sometimes I see the other half. I've never sat through the whole thing straight through.
That's awesome. So you said that, so you constantly keep rewriting it, right? You keep updating it and your characters kind of grow and stuff like that.
Yeah.
But you also said that in the beginning, the characters were based off of you and your co-writer, right? So do you think that as you learn and grow through your mental health and things like that, your characters are starting to take on a whole new shape because of that?
100%. And I'm realizing that I'm becoming other characters in the show. Like I said earlier, like there's a father character and there's a grandmother character and there's a student teacher relationship. And when we first started writing, I 100% saw myself in the student and wrote this sort of teacher character who's the lead. His name is Truman, sort of off of teachers who had influenced me when I went to them and asked for help. And now I teach music and with my 6th and 7th and 8th graders and 9th graders. And those conversations are now kind of flipping where they're coming to me for advice and I'm the teacher. And I'm also, you know, I don't know, a handful of years away from being a dad. I don't know. I mean, I was not born to write musicals. I was born to be a dad, and I just wasted my time writing musicals while I wait to have a kid. So I'm seeing that I'm turning into some of these other characters as we continue to write. And I know that on draft 20, God, I hope we don't have to do draft 20, but I know that by draft 20, I will be a father and I'll be seeing this show from a whole different light and can change that character. And it's sort of this never ending.
I kind of went through something kind of similar, I guess. So, big Harry Potter fan, go ahead, raise your hand if you're Harry Potter.
Oh, yeah.
Fan. So I grew up reading the books when I was in middle school to high school, right? I think that's kind of when they started occurring. And then, so I watched the films come out, and I'm a big Harry Potter fan. I got an English bulldog named Dobby. I've got a what is it? We just got this. It's called a skinny pig. It's a hairless guinea pig, and I named him Gellert Grindelwalter because we just went and saw the Grindelwald Fantastic Beasts, right? But so my youngest son, is into the Fantastic Beasts series, and I was like, well, if you're gonna get into that, and he's experiencing it like I experienced Harry Potter, I was like, let's watch Harry Potter together, you know. And when you're younger, when I was younger, I sided with Harry. That's how I saw the story. That's how I envisioned it. That's how I read it, you know. Rewatching these movies, and I reread all the books too, from James and Lily and the adult's perspective, because now I'm an adult, it's a completely different ride. And there's a point when James and Lily were murdered by Voldemort, I found that I became super emotional because I put myself in that situation. What if I did complete and my kids are alone now? You know? So like it went back into, so it kind of was one of those like epiphany moments where I was like, holy shit, this story has a whole different meaning now than it did. It's not just about magic anymore. Now it's got this whole, it started making me feel some feelings that I wasn't prepared to fight anymore. You know what I mean? So when I'm listening to you talk about your characters evolving, I think that concept is really, for lack of a better, it's really fucking cool. Like you started here and your characters were this way, but as you keep going and you put on these shows and your characters evolving, for somebody in the audience who might have saw you at this level and are now coming in here, how cool of a ride would that be, you know? To kind of see how they grew, and it's not just a one-time be-all story. It kind of takes on a whole new shape, you know?
Yeah, it's like almost like our catch-all. It's like a journal where you flip back to, I don't know, what you wrote last year, and you're like, oh my God, I was feeling that, really? You know, or I said it that way, and now I totally understand what was going on or what was making me anxious then. And
if I have to see one more Facebook memory that makes my skin crawl that I wrote, I'm gonna
Oh, when they pop up, I'm like, I guess
I'm like, oh my God, I wrote that.
Correct
Why
that
did
grammar.
What the heck was I talking about?
Or those 2014 posts, I'm like, oh my God, I wrote that?
I'm not even the same person as some, and the cringe ones is for sure, but you ever read a Facebook memory post that's like, I didn't write, it's not even a cringe thing, it's like, that's not even the same human being. Like this, like, I don't even remember being in that mindset that constructing that sentence even makes any sense to me whatsoever. Like,
that's what having kids is in this day and age, Carl. Now you don't know what the hell
or
they're
those
talking
aim
about.
away messages.
Oh, okay. Now let's get a little warmer. Because you know, it's funny again, communication thing. You bring up Harry Potter and I was a Star Wars and Star Trek person myself, and with Star Wars, like as an age communication, blah 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 blah. You know, as a kid, you sort of side with you think you radicalize, like, oh, Darth Vader, he's cool, or whatever. But as they get older and start to appreciate the idea of like enslavement and corruption and repression and and everything, I used to think the rebels were lame. You know what I mean? Like, not Luke Skywalker, that was all cool, but I thought like the rebels are goody two shoes and the Empire is cool, and then like there's a whole baggage behind that. I just brought that up. I like Harry, but I'm down with Harry Potter. But so keeping it going though, I want to follow on the line though about the fact that like communication by avenues too. So talking about opening the door, but like the way people can use things. Obviously, music, for instance. Somebody's got something to say and they use a song as a proxy. But there's other types of ways that people are communicating. In fact, you brought this up where projecting into a different thing. You're sad about something, so you go home and you've got anger at the ones around you, or you got a different type of feeling, and so it manifests in a different way. And I just think that there's a lot of age linking with that too. When you're younger, sadness can look like a lot of things. It can look like anger. I know from my own lived experience, I did the whole put a happy face kind of thing on, right? And just didn't, there was a lot of things there. A lot of it was just good old fashioned boys don't cry stuff, with like the painting of like the ethnic painting of like Brothers Don't Cry, and I'm biracial, but I didn't really have like a huge there's French and Italian in my bloodline, but I didn't have a lot of that, and I didn't even have a lot of like the brothers because I grew up in a suburb where I was the only really dark face, but I still cut in my head like boys don't cry, manly man. So like being happy, etc. And I just wonder, Jianna, you talk about from your practice and your professions where it is about helping people sort of get back into their functioning or helping people function with things. Being able to like hide things and how they communicate to you could be different from how they communicate in their workspace.
I mean, so as Ryan was talking, I was hearing a lot of perspective, right? So at one stage of your life, you view it as this way and this purpose, and then later it's going to flex because your experiences and your values and your education and your exposure and all of that scaffolding, right? But through the lifespan, like you have those fundamental years, which are your developmental years, right? You're learning cultural values, you're learning societal expectations, you're learning how to raise your hand in class before you speak. But then you're also trying to cope with your own anxiety, your own, I'm going to call them sensory preferences. So if you're tapping your feet or you're clicking your pen, but how are you dealing with everything you're hearing, everything you're seeing, and still coping with what your friends are doing? So are they on their iPads all day long, or are they playing Xbox? You now have to choose because you're in elementary school and you're in middle school. And then across that lifespan, you grow, and then we hit the ages that we all kind of touched on, the 20s, the 30s, the parenting, and then you're hitting the stage where you're retiring. Your role is completely different. You don't have that work expectation. You don't have that exact same income. You don't have that routine, that structure, that habit that you're used to. So now you have to reinvent yourself all over again. What do you like? What do you want to do? I don't know. Like, I haven't been myself in 55 years. I don't know. So that whole piece to getting up in the morning or taking a nap, or are you going to garden? Are you going to watch football all day? Like, those new patterns and habits are huge and essential. And then you get the part where now you have decisions. You're getting older, so you're also having more pain. You're also struggling with new illnesses you never had before. So you're dealing with the grief, the loss, the whole part that your body used to do these things and now it can't, right? So it's just that whole aspect of, am I going to stay home? And am I going to be able to do my stairs, to do my laundry? And those pieces that we don't think about, that our parents are now going through. So we have to be there to understand where they're at and not tell them where they need to be, but listen to what they want. And I guess that's that perspective of where I'm at, and then where the people who are aging and making these decisions need somewhere else to turn.
And I think that, can I jump in? Is that fine?
Oh, yeah.
I think the perspective is kind of like, it's really polishing. I don't think that anybody can ever change perspective by going in a different direction. You're really just polishing what's already there, however you want to polish it. Like, when I was a kid, little guy, like kindergarten, when I grew up, I wanted to be John Travolta. Figure that one out. Because
That's a solid life goal, though. I like that.
I know, I'm still working on it. And so like, because I love the movie Grease, thought it was the coolest. I wanted to be John Travolta. I was John Travolta for Halloween, kindergarten. It was a whole thing. And it's not like I'm still working on that, but when perspective starts to shift, it's like, okay, well, then maybe I want to be an actor. Okay, well, then maybe I want to be in theater. Okay, then maybe, and you can sort of start to draw the line from what I'm doing now to the fact that I wanted to be John Travolta. And I assume, and I, of course I can't speak for anybody over the age of 25 because I don't know anything, but I can assume that when I'm 50 or when I'm 70, that there will still be dots that can trace all the way back to when I was in kindergarten and I wanted to be John Travolta. Because as of right now, I can still trace that long line of dots back to that. And so I think perspective is not necessarily changing your thought process, but just continuing to hone and polish what was instilled when you were a kiddo, you know?
I think personality is always there and a part of it. And I agree with that for sure. But I think
even pushing yourself outside of your comfort zone.
Yeah.
And
Can I?
challenging yourself. No.
I've been describing this so through the last year doing like a lot of internal reflection and things like that. So I was severely injured in the military. I got shot in the leg and I was blown up twice and I went through like all these things, right? And then I got to my dark point where I had my suicidal ideation and I didn't want to be this broke down. My kids didn't deserve this. Like how I have to walk with a prosthetic device. I had to do all this crazy stuff, and that just wasn't me. Because before that, I was a state track athlete, and it just didn't fit the vision. You know, this is how my life's going to be, and it completely went the opposite direction on me because of some stuff that was out of my control. You know, and I got married before any of that occurred, and then so that kind of played a big part on me too. And I think a big part of me healing and being open and able to talk about this stuff was I'm not the guy my wife married. I'm not the guy who stood by her side when my kids were born. And I tell people this is that, and I've told my family this, is that guy died in some desert in Afghanistan somewhere. He's gone. He's not coming back. And a lot of the talking about perspective, a lot of it was I never came to terms with that until recently. I still wanted to be that guy. So you're talking about drawing the lines back to what you want. You wanted to be John Travolta, which I still think is pretty badass. But there's a lot of stuff that I wanted to be and do, and I know that stuff's not. It's just not a part of it anymore. There's so much that happened in these blasts and my physical injuries and things like that up until recently I still wasn't okay that guy died. You know, that big part of me is gone, you know. But I'll tell you this, that that dude dying created, if I do say so myself, a pretty badass dude on this side, all right? Because I like who I've become for the first time in a long, long time. It feels really cool to say that. Like, I'm solid with this version of me. He's more compassionate, and I go outside of my box and I try and learn things about other intersectionalities or intersections and cultures and things like that. I teach in India and virtually, obviously, I don't get to go there unfortunately, but I teach in India, and I've done it for 3 months straight, and the fear I had trying to pronounce Indian names from Bangladesh and stuff like that, I felt like such a dickhead, and I was constantly finding myself like, so I focused, I made myself learn how to pronounce that stuff, you know, because I like that I can do that type of stuff, you know, and I'm okay that guy is gone now because I think this version of me it's becoming the guy that I wanted to. There is some thread that's connected back to that past. I don't know what it is, but it is there. And I think that's pretty rad. I think that's cool that like I finally come to that conclusion and I'm becoming okay with some of these things. I want to share this too. And this is, I'm going to try and stop talking for a little while, but the amount of cool shit that I've done starting from the day I chose not to kill myself is fucking wild. I've been on Sports Center twice. I've won medals in the Paralympic world in international sporting competitions when doctors said I couldn't. I met Prince Harry. I did all this wild, crazy stuff. And the coolest thing about it all is now my kids are replacing every one of those accomplishments, and I get to watch it happen because I chose to stay alive. And it's the fucking coolest thing to see. When they bring home a participation medal, one of my international medals gets taken down and put in a box somewhere. When they bring home a report card with A's and this and that, my special recognition from the FBI, that goes away and gets put in a box, and I can bury those things that I'm connecting to all this stuff, and now I'm watching it come to life through these two little guys, and that shit's fucking cool.
That is cool. And again, thank you all so much for sharing. These are very powerful and important perspectives. And, you know, in thinking about perspective and the different modes of communication, I kind of want to just circle over to Roger, you know, in your experience with Lifeline work, I think about the spectrum of callers, right? And have you found in your extensive volunteer work, you know, well, what have you learned about communicating when people are calling in crisis? What have you learned about the variance across the age, right? You know, is it the same thing to talk to a teen who calls you versus someone else, you know, a parent or someone who may identify as older?
Well, it's the same and it's different. I mean, it's all about, you know, what we learn is we create a relationship. And from there, the conversation goes where the conversation wants to go. The most powerful thing that I've learned is that sentences that end in periods are not only useless, they're sometimes violent. The only thing that works are sentences that end in question marks.
Ooh.
I mean, that's the most powerful thing that I've learned after 19 years is that you don't end your sentences in periods. And everything about giving advice and telling people what they ought to do, all those are sentences that end in periods. And those things can be violent. So, I mean, I don't know if that answers your question, but yes, it's very different talking to an 80-year-old person who has serious disease versus a 6-year-old, you know, who's, you know, having problems with friends at school. But in some sense, the conversation is not different at all. It's about finding out what's going on and what's making life difficult. And would you be willing to tell me more? And what have you done in the past that's worked? And what are you going to do next? And all of those end in question marks. Because my solutions aren't going to help anybody out there. They have to find their own.
Do you ever feel like questioning comes off as aggressive?
I mean, if you mean a question like, are you some kind of an idiot? Yeah, I mean, that would be
No.
That might be, yeah.
Hey, tough it out, buddy. What happened? Hey,
I don't think so. But after I've built a relationship with the caller after a half an hour on the phone, and we've really delved into what's, sometimes I will say to them, would you mind if I push on you just a little bit with a really difficult question? You know, the caller will almost always say, no, please go right ahead. And so if I'm going to ask something really aggressive, I mean, I'll ask for permission first.
Leo, did I just cut you off?
No, I was actually wanted to add in there, going off of what Raj had said too, of especially in certain cultures or the way that in sessions, how I've approached it too, just depending on cultural dynamics. I'll be obviously, like as Roger said, like being direct when I have to be direct, but also taking a different route too, of not just saying the word suicide, but kind of approaching it in a different way, using specific language of, do you feel like you don't want to get out of bed, or if life's not worth living anymore? So that way I can approach it in a more sensitive way, but then also getting to the point eventually then being able to say the word suicide. And because if there is a stigma already within it, if I say this, then I'm going to get hospitalized right away. So I can approach it in my sessions, like in that way of just making sure, like, not as, like you said, a great word of like, can it come off aggressive, and like being able to, can I push you a little bit further? Can I challenge you? And I kind of really want to ask more questions, but being mindful of like who I'm talking to, but also like that's face to face versus like being on a phone. And especially what Roger and other individuals do, very thankful for everyone that does those call centers, because it's very much needed. And one of our board members, does the midnight shift, like the late, like overnight shift, and just them from younger kids to adults and everything. It's so needed. Just somebody listening there.
Absolutely. I know earlier on, before I got more formally involved, Lifeline volunteering was one of the first direct entry points for me. And I did actually have to step away from it after a while. And I want to, as we're winding down here, I kind of just want to circle back a little bit to, if you could elaborate, Roger, when you say build a relationship with them, right? So that's not what's your age, date of birth, what does that mean to you? Or what does that, it doesn't have to be verbatim, but like, what does that look like a little bit?
Well, they're calling a suicide hotline. So one of the first questions I'll ask is, so what's making life so difficult? Why did you call? What prompted you to press those 10 numbers on the phone and talk to me? And from there, I mean, then it's just a whole series of, I train people now in the suicide hotline, and my only advice to them is just be incredibly inquisitive. Just be incredibly inquisitive. Just find out everything you can about the person. Not only what's making life difficult right now, but what's been difficult in the past. And if you're really depressed, if you felt this way in the past, and it's just being incredibly inquisitive. There's nothing more to it than that. I say to the trainees, I say it's just a conversation between two human beings, nothing more. It's just two human beings trying to learn about one another. And so there's really nothing magic about it at all. It's just a conversation.
I would say that is magic, though, Roger, because from that mindset, I was alone, even though everyone around me was willing to help. And I didn't want it. I didn't need it because I felt broken. So by you just asking questions in that moment, yeah, I think that brings the people back to their senses, because you're not in the right senses. It's like a cloud around you that you just can't get out. I used to say this. When you put your hand on a stove and it's hot, your body tells it to go away. But when you're in that suicidal crisis moment, you want it. You want that pain. You want it to not be there anymore, And it's so strange. I think just by you asking questions, I think that's something I could have used.
I know we've gone probably way past, but I did talk many years ago to a young man who's just back from Afghanistan. Family was gone. Everything, what he told me that he experienced in Afghanistan. Oh my God, I can't even imagine. He had a job. It wasn't going well. He's calling me from the front seat of his car in a parking lot of a shopping center. And he starts the call by saying, I'm a horrible, evil person. I don't deserve to live. My question was, why? Why would you say such a thing? Well, my guess is that he's suffering from post-traumatic stress. I'm not a psychologist. I'm not going to diagnose. Living on an emotional edge with nobody in his life to talk to. He was in this retail store, right? And something pushed him over that emotional edge. He's trying to check out. He turned to the woman behind him in line, and he said some really cruel things. So now he's calling me. I'm a horrible, evil person. I don't deserve to live. How could I have done that to that poor woman? She didn't deserve any of those things that I said to her. And I said, so a moment ago, yes, you made a mistake and we both agree. But in this moment, you can be one of two people. You can be the kind of person who says, I don't care, she deserved it. Or you can be the kind of person who says, I really am sorry. I want to do better the next time. And I did the wrong thing. And which person do you want to be? Well, you know what he said. And so, from that point on, we had just built this relationship about, yes, you made a mistake. And I said to him, look, here's the dirty little secret about being human. You're going to make more mistakes. And we wish you hadn't made it. Both of us wish to God you hadn't made that mistake. But you're only human. And so, that call went very well because we just built that relationship over the fact that he wasn't a horrible, evil person. He was a really good young man who made a mistake. And I was able to help him sort of just tease that apart and see the difference between being horrible and being good who made a mistake.
I think everything good, this is speaking from my own, every success I've ever had, everything great that's ever occurred to me stems from some mistake, some failure along the way. And you either learn from the failure and you become fucking cool and awesome, or you let the failure define you, and you can't. And from the veteran perspective, that question, I've played that game. I'm an evil person who doesn't deserve to be here because of things that I had to do. And the question is, why do you feel that way? Why is that? It's something again, speaking just for myself, it was something very hard that I never wanted to come to terms with answering. It's something I see every night when I go to sleep. It's those things, and I don't want to tell those things to the people I care about the most, that I was capable of doing the things that I had to do, but communication and telling this story and talking and doing these sorts of things and things like that has made it easier. It doesn't make it easy. It's making it easier, though. And I think that's super important. So
it's endlessly amazing and fascinating to me that, when we're living through a mental challenge, the hurt and pain and the buildup, that pressure is almost crippling and paralyzing at times. But to talk to someone has even more terror, and it physically can hurt to think of talking to someone. And the minute you find one person in any medium, digital, texting, face-to-face, the second you start to say one little thing about how you really are, somebody asks how you're doing, you say, you're fine. You answer that honestly, and it almost hurts at what opening that valve feels like. If all of you could remember the first time you really laid it out to someone, outside of your own head, because that's painful too if you're just going in your head, but if you can remember the first time you ever had to lay it out to someone, that's almost a pain too. And it's terrifying, and it's all of these things. And winding down tonight, I just want folks who are listening now, or if you've joined us or joining this conversation later, to really appreciate the fact that the act of communicating, it's as scary as you might think it might be. It's as intense as it might be, but the way that you're worth staying around for that conversation and the things that can happen as a result of being able to open that conversation are worth the risks. But the thing I want you to pay attention to the most is that there's no one way to do this. That whether it's to a friend first, singing it out first, typing it to a stranger who you play video games with week to week to week, all of them are valid ways to address your mental health because your mental health is valid. And I hope you've had a chance to really get nuggets of wisdom from all of these folks who, the fact is that age is relative and experience, you're all elders in your own ways. You really are, regardless of what the calendar says. So I can't thank all of you enough for joining us and sharing your voices. I want you all to be guests. It's part of the network. You're all friends and allies. And I just want to close out, because we're running in we read our own schedule, but just out of appreciation everyone's time, we'll sort of make this a quick closing. If anyone has any sort of last minute closing hype, I usually have a different prompt, but just sort of go around the wheel, and if anyone has anything they want to drop or just say good night, that's cool. But again, thank you, all of you. And just closing words for everyone, starting with Dimple.
Oh, sorry.
Put you right on the spot. I'm just going right into it.
No, I just wanted to say I really enjoyed meeting everyone, and thank you again for having me on and hearing a lot of similarities of just how that support network that really stood out to me the most. That even though I am a therapist, I still need that support. And we also talked about family dynamics too, and just because they're family, it doesn't necessarily mean that they have to be your support. And as we also talked about, just growing and evolving as we get older, I think that's also a really important part too, that I really related to what Ryan had said about that.
Thank you so much. Marlo?
So I just wanted to, honestly, this was really beautiful. I just want to say thank you to all of you for sharing. I grew up in a household with like 0 to non-communication. Like just keep it in and make sure nobody finds out. And listening to you all, it just gives me a lot of hope, honestly, that not everyone is like parenting like that, and not everyone's doing things like this. Because sometimes, I see kids and I'm like, y'all, like that sounds so scary to be a kid, and like y'all making spaces for it, like being a kid not to be scary, and that's really beautiful. And I don't know, I just wish I had, I wish I grew up like that, and it just gives hope that it is happening and that we are creating those spaces to be able to ask for help, to be able to have these conversations before it gets to, an ambulance, before it gets to a situation like that. And just thank you all for sharing and for being here.
Thank you. You're a part of that too.
Yeah.
Who's counts? Roger?
I would simply say that I learned something valuable from each and every one of you tonight, and as a result, tomorrow I will be a different person.
Well, thank you, Roger.
Thank you, Roger. Jianna?
Oh. I guess what I want to leave with, only because it's weighing on me, it might not be the most positive, but as I grow and as I change, I'm pissing off a lot of people. And as I'm setting boundaries and I'm learning about myself, not everybody's happy and pleased with it, but my intent is good. And that's kind of what I'm going to leave there, because I have to say it.
That's beautiful and powerful. And, I don't want to sound over dramatic, but, there's this old, like, euphemism, not old, but in a gaming euphemism, you're going on the right way in a game when you keep encountering enemies. So, I don't want to be as over dramatic as saying you're making, like, enemies everywhere you go. But I'm just pointing out, not for nothing, but, if your growth is finding you, having to.
And along the way, I'm meeting new people. So I'll collect all of you and put you in my bucket.
Which is another sign, a gaming thing that you're
Anytime.
definitely on the right path.
Gotta find them all.
Ryan.
I thought that particular statement was super cool. I think you have to piss people off to set your boundaries, and I think that's their loss. I don't think that's your loss. So I think that's pretty sweet. 2 more things. Leo, this has been bugging me all night, and I got to ask the question, but how many times have you been told you look like Ben Savage?
Say it again. I missed what you said. What did you say?
How many times have you been told you look like Ben Savage?
Ben Savage?
Yes. Does he not look like Ben Savage? Somebody back me up on this.
The non-problematic one.
Right. Like the Boy Meets World back in
I
the day.
googled it. It's a little, yeah, I can see it.
Oh my
Yes.
God.
Yeah. If Ben Savage had facial hair and longer hair.
Oh, there you go. Somebody thinking you doing it.
Ryan, you're still aging us. Look at that.
Tell me
My
I'm not
question
right.
for Leo, though. Can I ask Leo a question too?
Of course.
Sure.
What are all the Post-its?
That's show number
The wall
2.
gives me anxiety.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was looking at what that was.
It gives me clarity, actually.
Do you take them off? Are they like changing?
This is show number 2. Yeah. So there's Act 2 and there's Act 1, and if we like a scene but we want it to be in the first act, it goes over there, and if we, I mean, it just continues on over there.
Oh my God, it's
I mean,
Yes.
it doesn't stop. And so that's how we wrote our first show, True, and so that's our second show. We're doing the same thing. It worked for us the first time. We're doing it again.
That's
super
amazing.
cool. I just
Why is
derailed
everything
us,
towards
too.
me?
I'm
My
sorry.
gosh.
No,
yeah.
I love your wall, honestly. I wish my post-its had important things instead of just reminders because I
The ones that
forget
don't have
everything.
The ones that don't have important things are over there.
You can write.
Are they a
those down to the
different
best,
color?
right?
I need a whole
No.
tour.
What?
Give me a tour.
All right, I'm on the spot right here. Ben Savage.
I
You know what?
derailed it with that comment.
I usually get Luke Bryan.
Luke
but
Bryan works. I can see
I don't
that.
believe it. There's more over there. There's some over here. They go all the way up. I mean,
Oh my God.
Yeah.
I think your walls are
Mine-
my goals.
that's show number 3. You know,
Yeah.
I'm
It's
not going to
crazy.
say just given the time because it's in the final season. It makes me think about Better Call Saul right now because they've kind of none of you are watching that show. It's all right.
No. I saw
They got a
that.
scheme going on that involves like post-it notes on a wall. So it's just
oh really? No, I'm too busy watching Boy Meets World right now.
You're in Boy Meets World, Leah. You're in it.
I'm in it.
Okay, I'll put us back on track. I'm sorry. I
Anyway,
had that.
sorry.
It was bothering me all day. I love that show. Okay, my thing to the viewers and to all of you and probably the most philosophical I'm gonna get here is that you 9 times out of 10 the plan in your head is not gonna go that way, but that doesn't mean that the outcome is going to be bad. And I'll tell you from experience, oftentimes that outcome is a lot better than what you thought was going to occur. And I'm going to leave it at that and let you interpret that as you will. But thank you, all of you. I've learned a lot tonight too.
Garth Brooks once sang a song that said one of God's greatest gifts is unanswered.
unanswered prayers.
Yep. Go ahead,
Just
Leo.
the other night
Leo.
at a hometown football game, my wife and I ran into my old high school
I'm sorry.
friend. Hey, he's back. Look, he's on a stadium tour right now, and I'm so jealous. And yeah, I guess y'all didn't know Garth is my patron saint. So we just all right, Leo, you're up.
Oh man.
These references.
So I guess I was given the last piece of wisdom here to say, oh goodness. This was great. I don't get the opportunity to talk to a lot of folks like this about this topic of mental health as often anymore. It was kind of a thing that I did a bunch pre-pandemic, and then nobody was talking to anybody. So, but I think that, you know, it's difficult to keep your eye on the prize and stay focused when you're working on stuff like I'm working on. And it's good. It's been a good way to get me back on track. Tonight is really what it is, to know that there are, 6 other humans out there who are doing very different things, but at least have a good head on their shoulders. It's difficult to not let this thing get in the way of notifications popping up that folks don't have the greatest heads on their shoulders. It's good to know that there's at the very least 6 right now. Same. I learned a lot tonight too, and I like to think of myself as a lifelong learner. So I'm looking forward to hopefully joining this Twitch call in 50 years, if Twitch is still a thing, if I'm still a thing. And being the wisdom keeper who can, quote something from you 6,
That's wonderful. Thank you so much, everybody. And our guests, Jianna, Roger, Leo, Ryan, Marlo, Dimple, thank you so much for joining us tonight. And this is going to conclude our presentation, our episode, Raising the Visibility. Y'all stay in the please stay in backstage. We're going to talk a little bit more in a second, but as I'm going to sign out here, good night, everybody. Finger quotes. For those of you watching right now, I can't thank you enough for joining us for these conversations. It's something that it's our honor to present this information, education, and these discussions to you, whether you're joining us right now in live or you're visiting this content at a later date. And from episode 2, talking about age, well, we wanted to make it clear that mental health is a thing across all spectrums. The biggest thing I wanted to drive home for you all tonight is that communication. At any age, talking about our mental health is an incredibly difficult thing. And there's a lot of different ways and different vehicles that we can make that happen. But the fact is that because of your age, because of your social environments, you can get it into your mind that you just aren't able or shouldn't be someone who talks about mental health. It's very easy to believe that what you're experiencing is something that you're alone with. It's very easy to believe that you're weak or should feel ashamed or you're not supposed to be going through the challenges that you're experiencing. And it's through no fault of your own. It's things that are constantly reinforced on us. And it doesn't just have to be a toxic or hostile person, a classic sort of the bully telling us to feel ashamed. It can be things that are just passed down to us and reinforced by people who love us, by our family members, by our friends and peers, people who are perpetuating false attitudes about our mental health and how we're supposed to respond and treat it. And what I hope you take away from tonight is understanding that your mental health, it's not just a matter of your agency, it's not your imagination. You have the right to go after and take care of making yourself better. There are resources out there and you're not alone. And if you find that people who, on the face of it, should be supportive, whether those are guardians as parents, friends, peers, or others around you, just because things may not seem like there are supportive people around you, you are not alone, and there are individuals who are ready to engage. There are communities, organizations, and resources that can support you, even if your immediate environment feels isolating and unsupportive. And I hope you can really appreciate from the amazing voices you heard tonight that it's not always a linear road, and sometimes help and support and making yourself feel better and getting better isn't just going to be as simple as reaching out to someone who you think should be supportive. But it's not your imagination. Your mental health is real, and you deserve to go after and find supports to have it treated as the reality you're experiencing. So as always, when we talk about the network, we want you to understand that you're not alone, and together there's hope for all of us. And I hope you join us for our ongoing programming. Check it on our website to look at how you can watch stream for Hope Cup participants. Don't forget about the Tomorrow Show on Sunday, and we'll see you next week. Thank you so much, and have a great evening.